Use your sportscaster voice. I'll feel more at home.
He's got some review he's doing, he'll be in after that.
Good morning. Today is October 3rd, 2023, and we are here for a work session. And Chair Ziegler is running late today, so I'll be getting us started with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Superintendent Connor, if you'd like to get us introduced with the policy updates, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We had such a great workshop the last time that we figured we'd bring Mr. Parento back for a round two of policy updates. We have 10 policies that we would like to bring forth for notice for revision. And so at this time, I will hand it over to Mr. Parento for updates on our policies.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good morning, Madam Vice Chair and members of the board. As the Superintendent said, we do have another number of policies here that we have been working through the different departments to make updates to be in compliance with state law and DOE rule. So we'll get started with those. The first one is Rule 3.31. This is a new rule that we have that we're working on. This is for school-sponsored events and activities. This complies with the DOE rule from their July meeting, defines school-sponsored events and activities, outlines the requirements for these events, describes what types of activities are prohibited based on Florida statutes, provides a list of parental notification requirements and requirements for overnight lodging on school-sponsored events and activities. So if you'd like, we can do sort of how we did last time and kind of go through these one by one as we discuss. And any questions that the board has, we can answer. And Mr. Duggan is here as well. He helped revise and write these policies.
Sure. Sounds great.
Right. So if you've had an opportunity to review these policies, any questions or comments around 3.31?
No questions.
No questions? Okay, we will move on. The next policy is 2.701. This is the district's policy on hazing. We updated the definition of hazing to cover additional items that are in the Florida statute, and updates should or may to shall for reporting instances. It also removes the immunity provision in there, similar to what we did at the previous workshop with policy 2.70 and 2.71. Any questions regarding this policy?
No questions.
The next policy is the student dating and violence policy. It updates awareness of incidents to broaden the scope of reporting for these types of incidents. Updates should or may to shall in reporting instances as well. It also updates the parental notification requirements in specific instances, updates the definition for dating partner, removes immunity and amnesty similar to policy 2.70 and 2.71, and also updates investigative procedures to include grievance procedures to be consistent with Title IX requirements. The next policy is 5.325. This is dating, violence, and abuse. This policy is very similar but less complete than policy 2.72 on student dating and violence. And so it's recommended that we keep policy 2.72 and just remove this one. That way we don't have multiple policies that may provide some sort of confusion for the public and for parents in the district. Next policy is 6.70, professional development. This just updates the term professional development to professional learning, which is based on the new state guidelines, just making sure that our policy is in compliance with that. Policy 2.90 is smoking and tobacco-free environment. This update is to our current policy based on a recommendation from Tobacco Free Florida. There's an addition to the language under Section 7 on tobacco promotion that's prohibited. So we just wanted to go along with their guidance in this policy. Next policy is 5.16, children of military families. There's changes in this policy to the eligibility requirements based on HB 633. 5.32, zero tolerance for school-related crimes. This change adds a provision from HB 1537 that there's a presumption that the actions of any student who intervenes in the defense of another student or in self-defense used only the amount of force necessary to stop a violent act in order to restore or maintain the safety of others. It also adds language on protected classifications. Policy 5.72 is the legal name of student. This change adds required consent from parents for a child to be referred to by any deviation from their legal name. This is a form that the state requires districts to have, so we're just updating the policy to be in compliance with that. Policy 7.51 on payroll, there's new language added to define paid days and unpaid days. There's also information added for salary adjustments if a person separates employment prior to the end of the school year. Those are all the policies that we have updated at this time for this workshop, and just providing an update from September 19th. Because of the permission that we received from the board at the previous workshop to begin the advertisement period, we have begun public notice process for 30 different policies at this time. We hope to bring these policies forward for first draft reading and noticing of new rules at the October 17th meeting, with an intended adoption at the November 28th board meeting. That would be the first meeting after the required notice period expires. And currently, we have roughly 10 to 12 additional policies that are in various stages of review and revision for the next available workshop.
Thank you. Well done.
Madam Vice Chair, our next item is just solidifying our legislative platform. I'm going to move this item. I know we have a couple of board members that are planning to be here at a later time, and may want to weigh in on this item before we approve it formally tonight. So we will move on actually to, Mr. Pernchow, one more thing.
I'll just say that with us moving this, we do have Ms. Fay from Capital City Consulting on the line. So I think we can allow her to hang up, and then I'll send her a message when we get ready to address this item so she can be available for that at that time.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So capital improvements update?
All right. We're going to move on to capital improvement updates. We have Rich Collins here from the Emergency Operations Center, and Mr. Jody Dumas, our Chief Operating Officer.
All right, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to come back in front of you and have some additional discussions about a couple of items in the capital budget. If you remember when we presented the CIP, we went over each project that is contained in CIP in detail. And one of the conversations we had was the $5 million that the board previously had elected to fund the new regional fire training facility to make sure we move our training facility from Beneva Road over to the new facility in partnership with the county and their emergency operations. And then since then, as many of our projects, we've had discussions about escalating costs and had to come back to you several times to increase budgets. We've been having the same conversation with Mr. Rich Collins, who's here today to kind of discuss the project about the regional fire training facility project. And so the request had come from his team to have the board consider additional funding for the project. And as a result of that conversation with you last time, we agreed to come back in front of you with more information regarding the project, who the funding agencies are, and exactly where they were with the funds they need to complete the project. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Rich Collins today to kind of walk you through and answer any questions you may have.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for the honor of being able to share with you today an update on the Fire Academy. Appreciate you taking the time to take the update and potentially partner with us further. So I'd like to start off with just a quick brief of why we're asking and what we're doing with the Regional Fire Training Academy. I know the primary mission for the school district is K through 12, but the board and STC has been a phenomenal partner in our community in preparing young men and women to join the technical aspects of public safety through the Fire Academy and emergency medical service and law enforcement. And that is a bridge and a pathway for so many into a future role in a career. You know, as somebody who's been in fire safety and public safety for 33 years, if you would have told me when I started my technical education 33 years ago that today I'd be sitting in front of a board talking about a $59 million project, I probably would have laughed. So it is an incredible pathway for so many children. So the goal for this program is to bring young adults from our community into a public safety career and continue to grow from within the Sarasota County and regional area future public safety professionals as firefighters and EMTs and paramedics. When we started the project, you know, we wanted to look at that as a regional approach, so working with partners across the region. And there's a lot of anecdotal information and now further information that supports why this is such an important need. I have and can share with the board, this is a white paper on recruitment and retention in the Florida Fire Service. It was prepared by the Florida Fire Chiefs and the Florida State Fire Marshal's Office, who we've been working with for part of the funding on this. And over the next 5 years in our region alone, we expect, based on surveys with public safety agencies, a need of almost 600 firefighters in positions around the region in the next 5 to 6 years. And when you look across the state, it's almost 6,500 that are needed. There's not enough technical education schools out there to support the need that is coming down the pike from our local agencies as we continue to grow throughout the state. So this is extremely important for us as we talk about bringing from within our community future firefighters. And then on the more internal side, our firefighters that are already here, the current facility that we have is aged. It doesn't provide the level of training that's needed for both beginning and current firefighters. What we have put together as a team, working with Ron and the group from the school district as well as our partners, is a program that will allow us to train our firefighters on all of the various hazards within Sarasota County, from high-rise to hazardous materials to technical rescue. Everything that we do will be able to train, and that's what we've put together as part of this package. So I'll spend a couple minutes going through what it looks like. This rendering shows the tactical village. We have partnered with multiple groups, one of them Roger LaBeouf, who's one of the experts in the country on building long-lasting fire training facilities. So our goal is that this is a 30 to 40 year or longer, 50-year project to take care of our community. You'll see what looks like a tactical village that is basically blocks with streets, with various buildings and props around the facility. One of the biggest being a 5-story multi-training facility that we'll be able to use both for fire, law, technical rescue, fire training with Class B, which is propane training. So we'll be able to do multiple things from high-rise training through commercial occupancy to apartments. And then up towards the top, you see J, which is a outdoor classroom, and right near there we have a Class A building, which is a 2-story single-family home that will be able to do Class A burn, which is wood and straw type material, so they'll be able to actually utilize their skills on actual fire. I liken the Class B buildings to being like the football team doing training during the week. You're doing all the squads and runs, and then you move over to the Class A building for the actual hands-on of moving through the heat and smoke on the real fire. So this also has every aspect of technical training, as well as a classroom and a fire station facility. It's not a fire station, but it's where we'll store the vehicles, the SCBA, all of the equipment to be able to do the training, and all the props that we utilize for both incumbent as well as brand new firefighter certification training. The next slide kind of takes that into deeper dive. You'll see the red buildings are the classroom, which is 25,000 or so square feet, 6 classrooms, as well as office space for both the college or the SDC staff and our training staff, as well as locker rooms, a break area for the students. So a much more robust ability to train firefighters, as well as a command area. So we'll be able to train our chief officers on command level firefighting. And then in the storage building with the fire apparatus is a dirty classroom. So when they come right out of training, they'll be able to go into that classroom and not get the inside of the school dirty. This kind of gives a breakdown of the classroom. You'll see a stadium type seating on the left, and then classrooms, the 4 classrooms right next to it. Up at the top on the left is the command classroom. In the middle there are the locker rooms and shower areas, open vestibule area, and on the right is the office area for our respective staffs. We've done a lot to try to reduce costs and put it into a perspective that is affordable. What you see here is actually a metal type building. So we're not building a block building, we're building a hurricane rated current construction metal type building that will be the training facility and classroom area. And then we start talking about budget challenges. When we originally started this project, I expected us to be somewhere around $30-some million, which was well within the capacity of what we had planned for max a borrow for the facility through the county, as well as the $5 million from the school district, as well as surtax 4 and any additional funding. So we knew we were going to be in that area, but obviously over the last few years, 2-3 years with COVID, the impacts on the economy as well as labor increasing, materials, we're at today about $59 million for the full project. There's a couple things we have pulled back, one of them being $3 million in a training pad, the driving training pad. However, that's not out of the picture. We're actually working internally with county departments. We all know that we have a strong need for CDL drivers, and they're partnering with us potentially. They'll pay for the pad and we'll allow them to use the classroom, so that would bring that back into the project. And then one of the Class B buildings, we had a building that we still have the design for, but it'll be a single story, kind of like a strip mall, which is something we regularly see around here. But we've kind of put that on hold depending on funding. So right now we're at about $59 million for the total project. And you'll see where we're at on funding to this point. We've been we've had a lot of support from the state fire marshal as well as our delegation at the state. So we've received between the school district and the county $3 million. We just received in the last governor's bill budget $1 million for the classroom. We've received $2 million for the burn tower, so $3 million from the state. We're looking at a max borrow on the county side. We're using and have already used several $1 million of impact fees. Surtax for $5 million. The city of Venice is in for $2 million. The school district, on your initial discussion and support, is $5 million. So we're about $9 million off right now. If the school district were supportive of a further $5 million, we are working with other counties and other areas of funding. We're looking at CDBGR and other areas where we could pull the rest of that funding in. We feel confident that we could make that happen. And so our ask is for the board to consider upping to $10 million to help us move forward, as our goal would be to begin construction right after the first of the year. We've got the land, we're ready. It's just getting through the final budgeting.
Can you discuss the municipalities, counties, who is involved in the complete partnership and use of the facility?
So the city of Venice is on board. The airport has, they don't have a ton of funding, but they're on board, so we're working through that. We're also working with some neighboring counties and looking at what their potential to join us on the regional side of it would be, and that's where we figure we're going to make the rest of that funding on the $4 million.
Mr. Collins, could you let everybody know where the actual location of the property is?
That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It is on Knights Trail in the center of the county, just outside of the landfill site. It is a great location for a regional concept. It allows units to move across the county as well as for students coming to classes to easily get to the location.
Also, are there going to be any of the buildings going to be any kind of Cat 5 structures where it would, similar to the EOC, where administration or anything from, like, as Northport, so you could use that as a hub for fire services? What's the rating going to end up being there, just out of curiosity?
It'll be 160 what the standard is, and we will use that for a staging area for our fire service units and other units when we have storms. That's the goal.
School district too, would they be able to also, regarding to, and if we needed an area in order to collect any kind of distribution stuff for any of the employees or the people in the South County, if anything ever to happen, would we also be able to partner in there?
I absolutely consider this to be a partnership with the school district. Ron and I work very closely together, and Jody, and whatever it takes to take care of our community is what we'll do when we have a disaster or storm approaching.
And the only other question is, what would the impact be for STC? Would that actual program then move to this new facility?
Yes.
So it would be no longer, so that would free up classroom space up in North County where the Fire Academy is currently?
So that current property we lease from the city, and so we obviously have to have a conversation about what we did with that. We either terminate the lease or keep it for I believe we're through 2027 on that lease. I'd have to verify on that. That property is basically portables, along with the burn building and the fire tower and a few storage facilities, but it's older portables sitting on that facility, so there's not really any structure that we would have permanently sitting there.
And could you discuss a little bit about the Suncoast College, Sarasota County Schools, Suncoast College, and their role in training, if any, in this facility?
So Dr. DePillo is in the room, and he's been part of these conversations with Mr. Collins from the start. So why don't we get him up here to kind of add some value to that conversation, okay?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for allowing Rich and us to consider this opportunity to further our educational plan and to enhance what we're doing currently. So what we have happening at the Fire Academy currently, we train approximately 200 students a year to enter into the fire profession. The county also uses that property to retrain and upscale their current employees, and the number is about 220 apprenticeships. Mm-hmm. So every year, and I think out of that program comes about, would you say 60% of the current staff in Sarasota County is from our college?
Yes.
Have been trained locally. So we are definitely impacting the local workforce with local students who want to become firemen. What our operation is now in the portables, as Jody speaks, has been there for 40 years maybe, and it is a constant maintenance issue. Currently, we have a couple leaky roofs. We just band-aided our fire smoke tower. So we are holding things together, knowing that we didn't want to invest a lot of money in that current property if the lease was going to expire within a couple years. If this new facility is a 30 to 40-year facility and we are investing $5 or $10 million, it breaks down to a very manageable amount of money per year that we don't have to invest as the district into a building and maintenance that the county's invested in. So I think, we talk about leveraging our money. A 20,000 square foot building for the amount of money that's being invested is probably a bargain for the county to get us back up to snuff with our training and our equipment, and having access to all of that equipment will enhance our program and probably make it much more attractive to students and grow that program. So with all that said, in the lease being out a couple more years, we would probably suggest to continue that property until the lease end and make the use of that property the best we can until we actually move in permanently to the new facility, because I would think that we're still 2 years out before we can get into the property. So we want to Band-Aid what we have, but think ahead down the road to our programs and our instructors and our staff. Most of our staff is part-time staff for that program. We do have 2 full-time staff members running the program and managing it, a coordinator and then an admin assistant that run the whole program. So all that would be located centrally right there at that new campus if it were to come to fruition, which I think it is. Does that answer your question, Ms. Rose?
Yes, absolutely. I think I just wanted to summarize for the community, for the public, that we do offer training at the Suncoast College in fire services, and there is a need in the region and locally. You said 600. Was that your number of the shortage?
Across the state, 6,500. Regionally alone, about 600.
And you would look at Dr. DiPillo, there's strong potential that the program and training that we offer as a school system at Suncoast College would expand.
Yeah, I agree. I think with those numbers said, just impact locally, not even regionally or statewide. And matter of fact, our training is such that our students who, when finishing a program, can go national in terms of the training. And it's pretty well recognized as a very intense, rigorous training that supersedes most of the agency's requirements to get in there. The other thing I'd like to just say is that we have other related programs that may end up using those facilities at sometimes. We have paramedic program, we have EMT programs. And that facility, the way it's designed, could be a satellite classroom for a lot of different activities within the college. So I think we'll get our money's worth out of the property. I know it's a big ask, but I think the value added to the program and the enrollment increase and what we'll have at the end will be spectacular. And just think, we just did a groundbreaking at a school out there. You know, there's going to be fire stations wherever you're building 5,000 houses, you got to have a couple fire stations, and then they have to have 2 different shifts. And then, how many people is that's going to be needed in addition to our retirees coming out of the fire department?
And all of the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mrs. Marinelli. All of the municipalities from Northport to Longboat Key, I know you mentioned Venice, all of the areas of Sarasota County, will they be participating and using this as training?
We believe that all of them will. So Northport just built their own smaller tower, but I believe from a regional concept. So to add to what Ron's saying, when we look at the future of public safety in Sarasota County, what we would like to see is that starting in middle school, we're out in high school talking to students about a potential career in public safety and building that support for them to move in that direction, those that would like to. And then they go through incumbent training at STC and they become a firefighter and they become a Sarasota County firefighter. And specifically, just in the next 5 years, we're looking at adding, just to facilitate the staffing that we need for minimum staffing on apparatus, about 60 firefighters. We have new stations coming online, and each one of those stations is 18 to 24 firefighter hirings. So you can see that we're a large part of that number. And then they move through the journeyman program, which will be out at that location. And quite honestly, when we start talking about what it takes to become a journeyman, we see a number of courses that we partner with the STC team on that will be open regionally, that will help us support the program, and ultimately a college program that our firefighters are going through and getting their associates and bachelors and moving through so they're prepared for promotion and to move up in the organization. So we see it as their entire career life cycle of education out of that facility.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Marinelli, please.
I think this is for both of you, Dr. DiPillo. And with this anticipated growth, are we going to have enough staff to do the training?
So the school district uses a number of part-time staff, and that's through STC. And I know Ron's working on how we handle that, but we also are looking at what our staff is going to be for the training team as we move forward into that new building, and we expect to grow that team to support the program. And I think one of the ways that we're going to do that, and this is just my business side of how I think, we're going to do that through things like offering programs through CDL training and confined space and other trainings that industry needs that will help support our growth within the and the budget within the academy.
Thank you, because I think if we're looking at long-term, then we would have to build into our budget for the future, paying appropriately and adequately the staff that we're going to need.
With that said, 90% of the instructional model is part-time staff. Part-time staff who are actually firefighters currently in the field. They're practitioners. They bring that knowledge right to the desk of the students who are learning it. So we have direct impact from the field to the classroom. With that said, it's very adaptable to the need. So if we need to bring on an additional 1 or 2 part-time instructors to get that growth, it's much easier to do that than it is to hire a full-time unit of instruction. And we budget it such that when we have 15 or 20 firefighters and they're paying tuition, the part-time versus full-time is much more beneficial financially to the school as opposed to hiring a full-time person. We would hire a full-time person, but we don't pay as much as firefighters get paid. So it's better to have them as adjuncts for us in that department because we get the most updated skilled trainings because that's what they're doing. And then the firefighters, of course, get to pick and see what students are doing the best. So the Sarasota County gets the best out of that group.
Okay.
And to that point, I think this is a timely conversation, not to take us off track of our agenda today, but our part-time pay for these adjuncts are really one of the lowest in the surrounding counties. And so we need to address that to ensure that we're able to fill those vacancies and as we need them. So that's just a part of the conversation that I think
That's what I was getting at, to make sure that we're paying adequately and to be able to put that in our budget so we can have the best instructors.
Thank you.
Well, I also, just real quick, I'd like to say, Mr. Collins, I've known you for a long time. Obviously, you do an exceptional job. I mean, just through emergency management, and I don't think half of people have any idea of what you do for the county. And I know Dr. DePillo, obviously, when we start talking, and my son graduated 2 years ago, when you start talking about trades, you start talking about fire service, law enforcement, this is a direct impact to everybody in this community, including safety, hurricanes, everything that you meant, building collapse. You look at all the stuff, you look at the growth, you look at all the things that are going on in the county. I mean, this actually has an opportunity for the district also with the partnership to be able to provide better service to our county, which our law enforcement and fire services, without question, is #1 in the state of Florida. And again, if, I've said it a million times, we should lead and never follow. We should always be the best and never ever should we should be okay with, with just meeting the standard or being okay at anything. One of the things that back when I was the chief is that we talked about is one of the things that I look to see at the fire academy, because we have the space, is we really need to do fire services and law enforcement, do rapid response to mass casualty, to do trainings in reference to that. We had one here for those, I know you guys remember, we had it at Riverview High School. It was probably, when we did that, 6-7 years ago, where we had the actual students were, we had the whole entire thing, triage, fire department, decon. I mean, everything was there. It would be great to be able to use that, then also to be able to do, when we had meetings with all the local law enforcement and the fire chiefs, it would be great to be the first county in the state to be able to have one rapid response policy where everybody knew where they were going, for everybody to be on the same page, which everybody has their own, but it would really be nice at the time that I was pushing for everybody to do it, especially when it comes to school safety, because I think that's obviously paramount when you throw in fire services, how, they are they are so important in the whole entire aspect of doing triaging, being able to get in their response. And I think that I look at it and saying, with the space, with that, and with the additional funding, which I would support, I just think that it's really important, because then it also opens up, when we look at all of this, the tragedies that are going on still in reference to schools and school safety, to be able to do that where firemen and law enforcement will be able to partner in doing mass casualty response and actually have places to do it, such as the buildings you're talking about, or talking about whether it's just a shopping mall like that strip center you talk about, or the high rise. You look at, some of the accidents I've had recently downtown Sarasota and other locations. So I just want to thank both of you guys for bringing that forward. And this would be another thing for Sarasota where people will want to come here, because it's going to be the state of art. It's almost like a regional training facility for firemen. I mean, I don't know of anywhere else that really has that, especially that's going to be this new. I don't know if you know of anywhere else, but I know you have tons of experience in fire service.
Well, in talking with the state, they're excited about having in this region. So we're very blessed. So, when you talk about Charlotte County, they just spent, I think it was 12 plus million on that ARF air firefighting, the airplane you see along 75 when you drive by the airport in Punta Gorda. So we have that access to the airport. We're going to add some stuff here to help the local airport. It is a regional concept that they're excited about. I think the other ones that are out there, obviously going to the State Fire College up in Ocala, move over towards the Miami side, up into the St. John's area. I mean, that's where you see the larger regional academies. I think this will be an opportunity for us to be on the forefront of teaching public safety in Sarasota County for our region.
Appreciate you being here, Mr. Collins. And when I think of safety and security, just in the school district alone, in the community at large, that is paramount first priority for all of us in order to even get to instruction and learning, and being very appreciative of our partnerships, not only with law enforcement, with fire service as well. I do support this, and I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Enos that not only do we want to lead in education, we want to lead in safety, security, and our partnerships and public safety as well. And I also would like to reinforce looking at the adjunct trainers and assuring that we can get those. I understand that we're having difficulty right now in comparison to what the going rate is in our community. So I just want to bring that to the attention of you, Superintendent Connor.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I would say, too, that's a larger conversation that I'd like to propose to the board here in the near future, not only around the adjunct part-time pay, but also our substitute pay. We are one of the lowest in the surrounding counties just in our teaching substitutes. And I think it is necessary for us to, in order to attract and have high percentage of fill rates, we'll address that probably all in one proposal for you here in the near future.
Thank you. Is there any other comments, questions?
So just in terms of kind of next steps, a way forward, it sounds like we've got support from the three board members here today. So I will ask Ms. Penner and her team to draft a budget amendment to the capital budget, which will come before the board for you to consider to officially move another $5 million into the project budget. And once that passes, we'll be able to fund the project with the total $10 million. So that'll be kind of next steps.
Thank you so much for the time and for the board's partnership and support with taking care and teaching our young public safety professionals and taking care of our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your partnership. And Mr. Collins, thank you for being here. Dr. DePillo, Mr. Dumas, thank you.
Madam Vice Chair, if you don't mind, could we take a recess? I do feel like we have one board member that is close to being present. And if you don't mind-
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
We will resume in, it's roughly 9:40, and you'd like to resume in 5 minutes, 10 minutes? In 10 minutes, we will resume at 9:50. Thank you.
Do you want me to full screen it?
This one, yeah. Hold on.
He's not in yet.
Well, we've got your input. We can allow Jody just, I think we'll allow you to share your thoughts on that.
Somebody needs to give me some sort of synopsis or update. Because they're going back to Fire Academy, so nothing yet.
But just leave it windowed.
The five
Or do you want me to full screen it?
Sure.
This is among the three.
Okay.
Mr. Edwards would like to comment on it.
Sure. So,
Are we
are we on yet? Got it.
Good morning once again. It is October 3rd, 2023, and we are resuming the workshop and just doing a review of capital improvement project with Mr. Dumas. And welcome, Mr. Edwards has joined us. And Mr. Dumas, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk this morning. Let me just kind of summarize the previous conversation we had. We had Mr. Rich Collins from the county, Director of the Emergency Operations for the county, and Dr. DiPillo at the table, and we had a discussion about the Regional Fire Training Facility that is been designed and waiting to get going. I believe they're going to try and break ground in January. As with many of the projects that we are doing in the school district over the last few years, we've had to come to the board for additional budget to cover the scope of the project, just because of the increase in construction costs going on across the nation, but certainly in Florida, as we're seeing all of the growth, and then still short of construction materials and supplies and all the labor to do the job. So that makes everything more expensive. So a few months ago, in talking about the regional fire training facility, Mr. Collins reached out to me to give me an update on where we are, and he had made a request that we presented during the capital budget conversation earlier this year. The board's previous commitment was $5 million to the project. That was with a $33 million potential budget 3-4 years ago. That budget has now grown to, even with the cost-saving measures in place, with some of the things they've done to kind of value engineer the project, is now about $59 million. And so they approached us to approach you to potentially add another $5 million to the contribution the board would make to the project for a total of $10 million. We had that conversation during the budget review of the capital improvement plan and the capital budget a few months ago, about a month ago actually. And the board requested we come back and have this follow-up today. So Mr. Collins kind of presented the status of the project, the budget of the project, who the regional partners are potentially going to be in the project, and then had a conversation again with the board members who were present, and we moved in a direction that we would draft a budget amendment through Ms. Penner's department to the capital budget to add an additional $5 million to the project. When that project is complete, again, we would close our Beneva location, which is we've been kind of just maintaining for the last few years. That is just portables. The fire tower and the burn building are all basically outdated out there. We'd need to replace those if we want to maintain that property. We're basically patching those to get to the point that we can move into the Regional Fire Training Academy. So that's kind of a quick summary of the previous conversation that we've had in the last half hour or so. So if I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I'm sorry for being tardy. The school board workshop was scheduled over top of a previous commitment that I had. So arranging logistics and timing was difficult at best, but I managed to get it done. But I need to understand a couple of things. As my understanding, the Fire Academy is a Sarasota County project, not a school board project. Is that correct?
Yes, the county they own the property. It's on their property. They are the constructor of the project. They will own the project. We, as the school board, we have contributed to that project to really fund the classroom section of the project. The many buildings are on that site. And again, as a partner with the county, to move our training of all of our firefighters in our STC program from the Beneva Road property over to the nice trail property. In terms of the synergy with the fire department, and really in terms of the training facilities being state of the art, we just aren't anymore in that project, in that program out there. And so I think that makes it, again, a nice synergy. And we also talked about some other opportunities to partner on some other types of training like CDL and things of that nature. And then if there's a storm, kind of being able to use that property for staging of materials and things like that. So yeah, it has kind of developed into a nice partnership, which is, I believe, already been there for a number of years, and kind of expanding upon that program.
Thank you. I want to also say that I was an original supporter of the $5 million, no questions asked. I understand the importance of training of firefighters and to upgrade the facilities. And without question, it was, for lack of a better word, a no-brainer for me to commit to the $5 million. I'm not sure that I would officially call it a partnership. I think that it's a continuing ed program that we offer, and that we are the classroom arm of that training. At least that's how my understanding and perception of it. But certainly from a community point of view, that it's a continuing ed program at STC, and that it's for the use of our entire community. What I notice here is that there's, to get to the $54,258,000, that they've added a potential of the additional $5 million, that they just, as best I can say, it would be nice if the school district offered additional money to the tune of $5 million, but we're not obligated to that number one. Number two, we're not obligated to any number. I do notice that the city of Venice has not contributed more money, and I believe that the last discussion that we had in a workshop was that Charlotte County and Lee County and surrounding counties would also be using this training facility. And I believe Mrs. Ziegler and I asked the question, were other counties being asked to contribute to this bottom line? And I don't notice it here in the math.
And I don't want to speak for Mr. Collins, but I believe in his conversation this morning, what he said is they're still in conversation with other surrounding counties and municipalities to potentially partner. That may be in terms of contribution to the capital budget that you see in front of you this morning. But I know there are also talks about kind of renting space, right? And so when he had a conversation about ongoing maintenance and being able to upkeep, utilities and everything else in terms of operational costs at the facility, one of his visions is that other departments, from other counties, municipalities will come in and rent the facility for training. And so it may not be all of it in terms of what you're seeing in terms of capital investment, but there'll be ongoing operational investment in terms of rental of those facilities that'll contribute to the ongoing operation. So that would benefit us too, because at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay the electric bill and all that stuff out there. So I think it's a combination as they move forward of maybe some capital investment from those communities, but then also just in terms of rental and use of the state-of-the-art facilities.
Well, that brings up another interesting point. I think from my seat as a school board member, I would like to drill down a little further than into the operational costs. As my understanding is that if it's a county project on county property and county land, then the county would be responsible for the electric bills and the operation and so forth and so on. Are you now saying that we are, as the school district, obligated in some fashion operationally in addition to the $5 million?
So as we moved into this project, we had a conversation with the county about we don't want our maintenance teams out there. We don't have capacity to do any of that stuff. And so as we look to, and we do have some draft operational agreements that have been developed as part of this project. And so that is still being vetted out in terms of who pays what. And so that will come in front of the board for approval as a separate document. But that's not been finalized yet because we haven't gotten to the point that we can fund the project. So there are some drafts out there. Obviously, we will make sure that our capital investment is part of the conversation of what we already contributed. But I just don't have that agreement in front of me today to be able to have a better conversation about that.
And in terms of the commitment from the school board for an additional amount of money. Let's say, let's not call it 5 million at this, I know that's the ask, but let's, an additional contribution is more of where I might be more comfortable. I think it's important for the school board as a whole to understand that operational partnership, if you will, financial partnership. And I would be hesitant to offer any vote until I understand the more, especially since right around the corner is a conversation of Florida House, which is not a good relationship between the county and the school board thus far of having built a building on our property. I understand that this is their building, and that's really what I'm trying to make sure that we, as the school board and the school district, stay in our lanes so that this confusion doesn't occur again. From my perspective, the other part of this is I notice, and I appreciate how painful it is to go through what we are committed to build at a particular price is not what we're ending up paying. We're building Sky Ranch, we've got Welland Park around the corner, and I don't notice the school board having the ability to go to the county commission and say, can you help us because, you know, Welland Park is almost double what we expected. That's not our place. And so I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about this additional ask, but I understand the benefits that it brings our community and the CTE. So at this particular point, I'm a maybe. I'm not moving until, as this school board member, understands the entire relationship financially.
Thank you, Superintendent Connor. I'll go to you for, do we have more legislative, we're not moving to legislative platforms yet. I believe we still have a capital improvement item.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to move on unless we have any more comments related to the Fire Academy. Okay, we will move on to our next item, which is the Florida House. Board members, I shared with you a letter recently sent by the Sarasota County government in terms of a lease agreement that back in September of 22, the school board voted to terminate a land lease agreement with the county. And on that property is the Florida House, which is owned by the county, where we own the land. And so as a result of voting to terminate that lease agreement, which gave a year for them to decide where to move in what direction, the county decided to negotiate a transfer of that house, that property, to the Manatee Sarasota Builder Industry Association. So they're working on an agreement now in negotiations of transferring ownership of the Florida House to MSBIA. And so now that we have this formal letter and the formal vote, and as they're going through negotiation, I think it's incumbent upon the board to make some decisions about next steps in terms of the Florida House, our property, our land, and how we're going to do it. We also have Ron DePillo, if you don't mind, Mr. DePillo, if you'll just make your way up to the group here. So I put that out there just to say we're looking for direction. Mr. Dumas will provide some options for us and open up the discussion.
Thank you, Superintendent Connor. So given the recent developments with the County Commission, we've kind of put our heads together and have basically three options that we feel are viable for the board to have conversation about and give us some direction. You know, in terms of your vote to terminate the lease with the county about a year ago, I feel that one of our options is we hold the county's foot to the fire and say you need to get your building off our property, essentially. We certainly could force that. That's part of the lease agreement we had with the county, and they're required to move that house off our property. And I believe, working through legal, we could force that to happen. So that is certainly one option if you'd like to consider that. A second option, as the county is having conversations with the MSBIA to transfer ownership, is working with the MSBIA in two aspects. One is to sit down with them and see what their intent is to do on the property, and we could potentially negotiate a lease with MSBIA to keep the house where it is and have them use it as they see fit. I have not had a conversation with them in terms of their use of the property, so I'm not exactly sure what that intent would be, but that certainly would be an option. And the second option, I think, would be to sit down with the MSBIA to say, would you consider selling or transferring ownership to the school district? I know there was conversation at one time that we wanted to retain the house for some purpose. And if the board wished, we could certainly have conversations with MSBIA about their willingness now to transfer ownership to the school district. So again, those are the three options. There may be more that the board would like us to consider, and we could certainly move forward with those. But again, as I see it, force the county to remove the house from our property in accordance with our lease agreement that we had in place with them, or work with the MSBIA to either have them come onto our property and use it as they would like to, or see if they would transfer ownership in some shape, form, or fashion to the school district for our purposes. So again, those are the three options I offer to you today, and open it up to conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Dumas. Just to provide a little more context, I did have a conversation with the county administrator about what was proposed to the county commission for this transfer of ownership. And there were four options presented to the Board of County Commissioners. One was to move the house at a cost of about $1 million. One was to demolish the house, which would have been about $35,000. To transfer ownership to the school district, or to transfer ownership to the builders associations. And so obviously we see the result of that vote was to transfer it to the builders association. I have not engaged in any conversation because this is very new. This is a very, this negotiation is still in progress. It is my understanding that they desire to have a relationship with the school district, the Builders Association, where possibly some CTE connections would be built into whatever agreement that we would have, where they would occupy the house and we would use and have programming coming out of CTE department in conjunction with that. Initially, I have some reservations with that prospect because there are a lot of, it would be a strain on us to make, we can make anything work. I will tell you that. We can make anything work. But this would be, we would really go out of our way to make that program work, because I have some questions and concerns about just some liability things of having an outside organization interacting with, our students and our staff. It just puts us in a liable situation. But I will look for direction from the board in terms of how you would like us to proceed, and offer my suggestions as the discussion progresses.
And please, Mrs. Marinelli.
Thank you. What is the condition of the house? Because it's been empty for a while, and then it was empty before the last tenant was in there. So what shape is that house in?
Well, I guess it's in okay shape. It certainly could be used for office space and things of that nature. It's not leaking. There's not a lot of damage. The house is in decent shape. It's an older home, as you know. I don't know that I know it's once considered state of the art in terms of kind of green initiatives. I'm not sure it's that anymore. But it's not. It doesn't have a leaking roof. It's still in okay shape. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And Dr. DiPello, do you have any input?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of echo what Superintendent said about we can make anything work with the right kind of agreements and effort. Currently, for us at the college, we don't have necessarily a benefit of having the house itself, but we can make something work inside of it. Option one, if it's demoed, then there's really nothing that we need to do at STC side. If it's a partnership with an outside organization, that's always challenging for us. It would be, for that house, in the distance it is from the campus, it's on the other side of Polytech, on the other side of a facility building. It just doesn't, it might as well be across town. So it really doesn't, it's not advantageous for us to use it. To run an academy or something out of there you might as well be at the landings here. There's really no advantage. We can make something work, any space that's available, and the creative nature of what that space looks like. It would be probably utilize at, a minimum. I don't know how to necessarily maximize the space until we get to a place where we start having conversations with people. When the Florida House Institute was functioning, we had very little interaction at the college level. It was mostly the elementary school students touring through there to see what kind of how to understand energy and xeriscaping in terms of outside and native plant kind of thing education. Really, for us in the post-secondary side, I struggle to find something to do with it. But again, as Superintendent Connor said, whatever scenario that ends up happening, we will do our best to partner with whoever or make anything work at whatever cost.
Mr. Edwards, please.
Thank you. Do we have a date that the lease was terminated? Because my understanding was that within that year, that there had to be resolution.
Yeah, we sent a letter on September 13th, 2022, and informed them that on September 6th of 2022, the board formally voted to terminate the lease.
And that gave 1 year from that date?
From September 6th, so we're already over that time period. And was there any consequence to what actually happened to the house ownership if the county didn't respond in a timely manner? Like, who actually owns the house now, since there's no lease?
Well, the county still owns the house. We own the property, and that's kind of the situation we're in, right? And I know the county had scheduled the meeting about a week or two in front of what they held the meeting to have the conversation, and the Adalia came through, and so the conversation was delayed about a week or two. And again, on the 26th of August is when they had the conversation about and voted to transfer the lease to MSBIA.
Okay, and if I understand, the original lease is, and I know it's been terminated, but originally they cannot assign the house or sublet the house without the school board approval. So in essence, they've already violated that by giving it to the Builders Association. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's why option one, I certainly feel like we could hold their feet to the fire in terms of the original lease agreement we had with the county.
Okay, so, and I need to just give a caveat here, especially since Mr. DiPillo and the superintendent are here. This is exactly my concern about the fire academy. Exactly. Because all of those understandings have to be very, very clear, because my understanding, and I'm speaking from having been a board member, I know Ms. Rose was here, having been a board member for why the lease was terminated was it became very complicated and convoluted about who was getting the house and who was occupying it and all this, that, and the other thing. And I think the board at that time decided that it was best to not be in any kind of partnership, especially since the house is on our property. 25 years ago when that happened, somebody thought it was a good idea, might have made sense, but it's better, I believe, for us to stay in our lanes, and that's why I'm bringing that up. Also, I want to point out that it was September 6th that we're terminating that relationship. And I believe Mr. Dumas was given the direction at the time under our previous superintendent that we were going to move forward to try and figure out how to get how we, the school district, could acquire that house, either through purchase or through the county granting it to us. And the idea, again, at the time, and I believe that was the direction that you were given, was that we have trades academies at our school district. We only had the one at the time, but there were two on deck. I had been, to Mrs. Marinelli's question, I had been to the house, I would say maybe 3 or 4 months prior to the termination of the lease. The gardens were actually being gleaned by the food bank. They were thriving. The house was beautiful. I had been invited to 2 different fundraisers. The house was being sublet for fundraisers. I believe some of our ag program at McIntosh was attending to the gardens. I mean, it was thriving. And for whatever the reasons were, the county terminated the lease with Southface, and that's how we said, okay, then let's move forward. So now the lease is terminated. We're moving in the direction of trying to find that, and then our superintendent is terminated, and everything goes on hold. So I appreciate why everything went on hold, but I'm really trying to reiterate that my work as a school board member to utilize Florida House has always been fluid while we were in an interim superintendent. I believe I have an opportunity for programming to go into the house. I think the trades community can do that, utilize it as well. Philanthropy has made commitments, at least in loose organizations, to have programming in place for elementary schools, gardening. We have the big push at STC for ag that we're doing. All of that, I believe, could be incorporated, and that was the original intent. I know that one of our programs had asked also about occupying the space as office space. Was that School Links, Mr. Connor?
Yes, sir.
They had inquired about using the space. So it just seems to me that it's better served as a building that we have. It's on our property. It seems kind of fruitful to spend fruitless to move it or destroy it to those sums of money. And if we can go back to the county and say, I know you gave it to somebody else, but maybe inappropriately, can we be the receivers of that generosity? I believe that it's a benefit to our students, a benefit to our community, and I'd like to see that move forward.
I want to say that I think the partnership that we've had with Sarasota County government or Northport or Longboat or Venice is extraordinarily valuable. As a individual board member, I was not in support of that separation agreement, and I feel the need to say that. Whether it's law enforcement, fire service, Sarasota County government is very valuable to me in a partnership with the district. I do understand that I respect the fact that they've made a decision, and I, as one board member, and would be looking for input from those present today, I would like to hear more about their intent, and if indeed it did go through and it is culminated that they have given it to a construction association, and hear more about what the intent was behind that. I think those partnerships and working together with as much communication as possible is a win-win into our benefit, as well as any other of the partnerships we have with, again, Northport, Venice, Longboat, Key, etc.
To your point, Ms. Rose, we have working relationships outside of the isolated case with the Florida House, with Northport, great working relationship with the city of Northport and its fire and police. The sheriff's office, great working relationship. We benefit dramatically from the academy. The fire response team and EMS and the chief of fire work great for the last 40 years, no issues. The Florida House is an anomaly. It's one of those I wouldn't characterize our relationships with entities in our region by the Florida House agreement. That's all I'll say.
Thank you very much for that. And I know that, that construction programs has been very important to all of us, the opportunities for career types of things. I know that Mrs. Marinelli and myself have been highly involved in that for multiple decades, and Mr. Edwards, I know that it's something that you also are very invested in. I think that, and again, I think this is an opportunity to have input that as one individual, I think communication is key, and I'd like to have more information on the intent, the options, and what the construction association, what their intent is. I know that we have had great opportunities with other construction. Gulf Coast Builders Exchange has really supported our school district. I think communication is the key, and working with our community and making the, decisions based on the impact on our school system and our students. So that's my input. Welcome, Mrs. Chair Ziegler, and we're just discussing the Florida House and looking for input.
Mrs. Marinelli?
Thank you. I have some take on this. I think I've always felt like, yes, the Florida House has been an anomaly. When I was working for the district, I remember when the Florida House and the whole concept came to our district. And it was a very popular thing with the community. We really didn't have a whole lot to do with it. It was just our land. And then over time, and I feel like there are some outside forces that have already had communications about this house, the Florida House. And I've always valued our working relationships with the county and all the other entities. But we, as the school board, have been thrown in the throes of this now. And it's in our lap. And I have said that I really would leave that up to our superintendent and Dr. DePillo, because you know the inner workings of all this, what we need, what we don't need, and the liability piece. But I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize our relationships with the builders, communities, whatever. So I do agree that communication is key. I'm not going to make a decision how that is until we do have, there's more communication between the three of you, and then report back. And I think it's just very important that whatever decision we make, that we're going to have a big say in this, that this isn't going to happen again, that we get stuck in the middle with a house being given when we even asked for the opportunity to buy it, and it wasn't presented to us, and now we have this situation. So I'm going to leave it with the three of you, that my personal, as one board member, and then get back with us what the intent, what really is the intent of that house, and how do we fit in with that, besides just the land.
Mr. Edwards?
Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of things. I do value our partnerships, and perhaps Ms. Rose misunderstood my intent. I do value our relationships with, as Dr. DePillo points out, with the sheriff and the police and the fire. We do have, and to the Gulf Coast Builders Exchange, and the hospital. I've been working on that. So my track record is such that I hope that I wasn't misunderstood, that I don't value partnerships and strategic alliances. I think what Mrs. Marinelli touched on is that in some sort of confusion or deliberate, I don't really want to get involved in it, but this conversation was thrust back on our lap when, in fact, the county had 12 months to either remove that piece of that house from our property, and then without any conversation with us or including us, decided that that's who we needed to be in partnership, if at all. I feel a little, I don't know what the word is. I feel that was a little out of their lane, and we work so hard to maintain relationships and to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes, that unfortunately, from this board seat, kind of feels that way, that we have to be the ones now to clean this up. And I'm hoping that the good piece of it is, and I also happen to agree with what Mrs. Marinelli said, that if the superintendent and Dr. DePillo and Mr. Dumas think that it can be utilized to our students and our community's advantage, which is to what my first choice is. And I have ideas and suggestions that I can present to the three of you along, as you're doing your deliberation. I would like to see that happen. I just don't want to be forced into a conversation that the county said, you have to partner with these people. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Mr. Enos.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. What I look at is kind of like this, is making assumptions, I think, is always dangerous, and we all understand what ends up happening. Is I think that at the end of the day, before anybody can make any decision on it, I would like to see Mr. Connor go speak to Mr. Jonathan Lewis to find out exactly what the county's intention of the board was, to get an overcap of why they did that. We ultimately hold the trump card, which is we have the lease, and that we get to pick whoever the person that comes in there, and we get to make a decision as to either take it or tear it down. Ultimately, it's the final, or that we have an option, at least have an option, because we could say, no, we're not approving them. So then what are they going to do? They ultimately would force their hands to sell it to us. So I think that, or, I don't think that they would, in partnership, would tear it down. At the end of the day, I would just like to say, okay, we need to have some initial conversation other than a letter to find out exactly what the intent was. Why did they do that? What is the process? Then have Mr. Connor meet with the Builders Association, find out what they're going to use. If it turns out that it's the benefit for our students and partnerships and all the rest of the community, then if it turns into that they are good purveyors, then they would have to be a very, very strict lease. Because what I look at is when you have a independent entity like that that's to the outside, is people that are coming onto the campus at STC. You also have Triad, you have Wilkinson, you have all of the Polytech, you have people that has to be pretty stringent in regard to if they're using it as operational offices, what are they using it for, who's going to be coming, and then we also need to look at the safety for everybody, because ultimately we are responsible for that. So it would have to be, as I talked to Mr. Connor about it, would have to be a very, very strict lease agreement to exactly what they would have to do to implement all of the safety measures that we would have in the district. But I think before you can do any of that, since nobody has had any conversation with the county commission in reference to what their decision making was, I think I would request as this board member is that for Mr. Connor to go talk to Jonathan Lewis to find out exactly as an overview of what their intent was. And it may just be an oversight on their part that they did this without with the lease. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Maybe they're looking. But to make an assumption, I think we ultimately need to get to what the answers are, and then to meet with them to find out, then to bring it back to the board, and then for us to make a decision. The first decision would be: Are we going to even, based on the lease that we hold, are we going to even do anything for the Builders Association? Because ultimately we have to approve whatever the county does as we move forward, because that's in the leasing agreement, which ultimately I want to follow the rules, as we all do, because ultimately we are the ones that make the decision. We got the letter, but the letter is just a letter. We have a lease agreement, and the lease agreement basically states that we get to make the decision. So I think, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think we at least need to get the information about why they made the decision to give it to that association, for then us to have the information to make a decision whether or not we accept them, which ultimately comes back, can we use it? And as Dr. DePillo, Mr. Connor says, is there something that we would be able to use that for, with, like I said, with Mr. Edwards talking about the garden and all the stuff back there, which goes along with the farmhouse at Magatosh. I mean, it makes a lot of sense if it's feasible to do it. But I think the initial conversation has to be with the county about exactly what was their thought patterns and what was the evidence, what was provided to them that they made that decision without contacting us.
Thank you. I know Mr. Connor wanted to speak, and then Mr. Edwards.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So I did have initial conversation with Mr. Lewis about the options that were presented to the Board of County Commissions. And one of those options was to transfer ownership to the school board, and to the other option being, the four being demolish, move it off the property, the Builders Association transfer, or the school board transfer property. I can investigate the rationale as to why. But I think at the end of the day, regardless of the rationale as to why they decided to do that, we'll still be sitting I think, in a position where we need to figure out what does this look like moving forward for us. It's kind of, we can find out why, but I don't think that changes what we have to do moving forward. So I would be glad to take that suggestion and maybe investigate a little more as to why. What I'm hearing so far, and I know Mr. Ziegler still needs to speak on this issue, but so far I hear consensus, at least from the four, that we need to just continue the conversation, find out more about the intent with giving this property over to, or the house over to the Builders Association, about what a potential partnership would look like, and then that will dictate what our next steps possibly will be.
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Just to kind of keep everything sequential and clean, I personally think that, and I understand about the, I do feel that the county is in violation of the lease in two places, whether it's intent and we're not, and we're all friends, but they're in violation in two places. One, they're beyond the September 6th. Number two, if we looked at the original lease, it says they can't assign the house without our approval, which they did. So if we just stay there and not go into any conversations with the Builders Association and all those kinds of things, I'd like to stay there and figure out, how do we go from here? Are you going to move it, demolish it, give it to us? I think are the three options that I would like to see happen. It keeps it clean. And then, as I've said, there are lots of options of how Florida House could be utilized if it was, and that is the appropriate time that the Builders Association would make a pitch as to what their partnership would look like, as many others that I think would be on the table. So sequentially, that's how I'm looking at the process. Before we get to the builders, there's a time and place to discuss partnerships. We need to go back to the original lease.
So I know Jody knows how I feel on this one, Mr. Dumas. To me, I think there's a good point raised. The way I started is I want to have a good partnership with the county. I think everyone says that. I think Mr. Edwards makes a good point that with that, the hot potato got back in our hands. Don't love that. I don't particularly want to spend any more time on this conversation, to be completely candid. And I don't want to see it put us in the operational red. That's where I stand. I know that the Builders Association, am I saying it BIA? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Over the year has certainly reached out, and my response was, I think we're still trying to figure out what happens. Whenever that was, I'm sure that they would want to sit down and have a conversation with Mr. Connor. So I just want to make that on the record that I think that's always been the intent, and to keep a clear communication on. I just didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to make any kind of dialogue before we had any green light or clearance or understanding where we're going, and we still don't. But I would like to see us move forward. I think that I agree with having the conversation from Mr. Connor and Mr. Dumas to figure out from the operational standpoint, does this make sense academically and structurally? If not, I don't see the value in continuing to have this. It's like Groundhog's Day. I feel like we're not going forward. And I don't disagree that would have liked to I think it would have been to have the standard of let's include the other county or other government agency into what that decision-making process is. That wasn't done. I'm not going to change my preferred tactic of still consistently wanting to see a good relationship, because we do so much intermingling with the county government, and I know Mr. Dumas knows that particularly well. So, and I don't think this rests on the staff by any means either. So that's my thing. I know that's not really an answer. It's just as quickly, how do we find a resolution as quickly as possible that's not going to cost us a lot of money, that's not going to tarnish any relationships, and that's going to either keep us from continuing to talk about this anymore or enhance our instructional situation? That's my take.
Okay. So just to be clear, I think in summation of everyone's input, what I hear is there are 3 options on the table. The property has seemingly through the vote of the county commission been transferred. The house has been transferred to the Builders Association, so they will, through negotiations, take ownership of that house. The question is, where is that house ultimately going to end up? Is it going to remain on our property through a lease agreement that we agree upon, or are they going to move it off the property? Essentially, the other option is they could transfer it to the school district. Having been that the county commission didn't go in that direction, it'll be interesting investigating what the Builders Associations, where their thoughts are on that. So I can investigate all of those with, I will wait until there is an actual agreement and a negotiation is settled with the county and the Builders Association as to what, once that's settled, then I think we move forward there.
To Mr. Edwards' point, are they able to negotiate? Like, do we need to be a part of that conversation so we're not prolonging this anymore, right? So to the point of the language in the contract, if it's something that we are required as the lessor as far as being approving whoever that is, am I correct there? I just want us to get to the table if we need to now instead of waiting.
Yep, I would say we will engage with our legal counsel to look at that contract to see what our responsibilities are in the contract.
And what, just one more question was, only because historically the 3 situations that you just outlined, I think, have been the same. And I don't know how accurate this is, but the demo of it seems to not be something. I don't know if you have any information on the demolishment. I mean, who would pay for that? Would it be the county? They just demolish it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the options that the county manager offered to the commission, one of them was have the county demo the house on the property and then rehabilitate the property to our liking. So I think that was one of the options. I think that was a $35,000 option.
Okay, Mr. Edwards, sorry.
Yeah, I was all there, Mr. Connor, until I feel that at least if I'm looking at and trying to assess behaviors, I think that the commissioners are probably as frustrated as Mrs. Ziegler. They are done having this conversation. And so let me give it to the Builders Association, and now you can deal with the school district is how it feels. And I'm not on that page. I'm on the page of going back to the county and saying, the lease says you can't do that, but honestly, you're beyond the lease. So let's go back to these 3 options is how I'd like to see that the next conversation proceed. That's my recommendation.
I see your point. I just feel like we're just going to continue kind of going around and round. I know Mr. Enos made really good points about the safety and security piece that I would like to know. I mean, I think that's a requirement, but to reinforce that, and perhaps that changes the ownership interest if that's going to increase their responsibility and expenses. I'm one, so I think we're on 2 different sides here, but and I can see where you're talking about. Yes, you think you summarized it very well, and I'm ready to move on. Or do you guys have any additional input?
I'm in favor of the summary Superintendent Connor gave, and that we need communication and we need legal counsel's feedback on the agreement before we make conclusions on what that agreement is.
Okay. I think I have consensus on
okay.
that. All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for holding the line.
Absolutely.
Bit by some kind of crazy spider.
So, Madam Chair, we did skip one agenda item, legislative platform. So we were going to circle back to that. So we, at this point, just to summarize, because I know we've had a few coming in a little late this morning. So we were able to look at 10 of our policies that we were proposing for revision. We had an update from Rich Collins from the EOC to talk about the Fire Academy and the proposal for an additional funding to help fund that project from the school district. We've also talked about the Florida House, and we are now going to bring up, just before tonight, we have a formal vote on our legislative platform. And I did send you some information regarding some of the items on here just to bring clarity to that. I just want to bring this conversation around one more time before we formally vote on our platform. And we also have Mr. Parento here as well. We did have Capital City consultants here this morning. Unfortunately, she had to get off the line. So we'll do our best to relay anything we need to our lobbyist.
Perfect. Well, and I also, so thank you for getting the additional information on the, so there are a couple different moving parts. The additional information on the deregulation as it related to HB1 and including the language in HB1 that kind of preempts us to start that conversation. So I think that's very helpful. I also wanted to raise just one conversation I've had with some people in the last week and actually over the weekend, and I think it's a relevant piece. As one board member, so it's we discussed the funding of the mental health. Let me find it here under school security, and I know during mental health assistance allocation funding, and I know that we discussed that as a board during the workshop where it's focused on the school security piece, not the instructional material. And I know that the superintendent and I discussed that as well. The one part I did want to raise to the board as just to be aware that there have been conversations, again, that there's the concern of the social emotional learning and all of the language and what's in statute and the standards and how it crosses over into this SEL and CASEL framework, right? So, and you know, and to my knowledge, I think when we have these conversations, there's the what once upon a time were the services that I think that Mrs. Marinelli, you're used to, and Mrs. Rose, as administrators here, and seeing the services that have been provided and the need to continue those services because we do have students that have challenges, whether it be behavioral or mental health aspects, and making sure we continuously go through the process of parental consent. And I know that it always gets brought up, but there is this part where things have changed, and when you consider the social emotional framework is where we're finding ourselves struggling. And so the state's requiring this, but then we know many constituents have raised concerns, and there actually is more and more evidence illustrating that despite the more resources and funding we're putting forward on mental health, it actually, unfortunately, we're seeing a continued increase in it. So there's some kind of disconnect. But we are pointing to the state as requiring us to do certain things. And so we're in a kind of a lose-lose situation, which I know Mrs. Rose does not like. And so as a result of that, over some time, I've had some conversations with members of the legislature, and my understanding is very strongly that there is a very high probability that there will be legislation filed as it relates to CASEL and removing any kind of requirements around the CASEL framework, which will ultimately, hopefully, help us kind of have some clarity and go back to the resources and mental health supports that many of us, and I always hear referred to, before things had kind of been co-opted into ulterior motives. However, I think that, so my proposal was to, one, make sure you guys make you aware of it, as this is just newly brought up to me. Again, going on, I believe it's important if we're going to continue to say, listen, we do believe in more mental health funding, but have a caveat of this, but we do need some clarity on certain elements here because there are concerns. I don't say, and because I'm bringing this up now, didn't know if it made more sense to pull it off. I want you to, because I got this information over the weekend, and that's why I wanted to address it. Because there's nuances to it, and I want you to be able to make an informed decision, but in my mind, of the continuation of, which I do support when it's with guardrails, of additional mental health funding, making sure it's tailored to what I know Mr. Enos mentioned, the risk assessments, but I also think as one board member, and hearing the concerns, and having listened over the last year and a half, 2 years, even to my colleagues who are experts in this field, that frustration where we feel like we're kind of in this no-win situation. And because I do believe there's an appetite for that legislation to clean that up so there is clarity in dividing those two areas, wanted to entertain that discussion. Mrs. Marinelli.
And I'm really glad you brought this up, because I do find this whole, I'm going to just use the word movement, very troubling. So I spent some time going back. I went to the Florida Department of Ed, and I looked at the counseling piece, which is still the same, which one of our counselors was on that committee, 2010, and that is the counselor framework, and it lays out specifically, and nowhere in there is the word mental health used, because you've all heard me say that is not something that we were ever to go into that realm. And social emotional learning, those words were never used. But that's still in place from 2010. So then I went and looked at the 2023 legislation, and that is where to me, the big disconnect, because in that, the legislature, it's all mental health. And I thought, well, the two aren't even talking. It's like they're mandating that counselors do this, and counselors have been bashed over this. And I think we need to do everything we can to protect them and to make sure that they are not getting into areas where the legislature and DOE says they're not. It doesn't matter if I agree, don't agree, but that is just the way it is. So there is a big disconnect. And I think whatever we can do to provide, services in the school setting for students, because that is the role of student services staff. And it says right in the whole counseling platform that the whole role of the counselor is to support the instructional piece from kindergarten to the post-secondary. So there is a disconnect, because nowhere does that say mental health. And whatever programs that are out there, and right now from what I understand, is that we're using the one that DOE approved from the First Lady, DeSantis, but people are even saying that is a component of social emotional learning. So it's how all of that comes together. I just think we need some guidance, because there is a big disconnect, and our staff and even us as board members are caught right in the middle of it. So if we have to spend more time on it, I'm okay with that, because I want to get it right. I want to get it right for our staff. I want to get it right for our students, parents, community, and this board.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I couldn't agree more. Mental health has never been a service or a role in our school district. We've had guidance counselors that are on staff that, as Mrs. Marinelli said, support instruction in the classroom. We've had social workers that work with families, and we've had school psychologists who assess and do testing for qualifying for state-approved programs instructionally. So the mental health piece is, thank you, Mrs. Ziegler. It is a no-win. We do need to protect our staff. We need to get back on focus of reading, math, science, civics, social studies, and how we support students. And the social emotional learning piece, when we stick to the standards, as Mrs. Marinelli said, the mental health is not in there. So thank you, Mrs. Ziegler, for bringing this to the attention of DOE, because I think we want optimal support for our students under the guise of education, and somehow or another this train has gone off the tracks, and that shouldn't be interpreted at all in the community, I think everyone on this board supports a student having a successful pathway in working with them, with the student and their family. But mental health has not been the business that we have been in ever. And I'm not sure that it's the state's intent, so thank you. It's where do we go next? My intent of this legislative piece was to have the funding to support increasing guidance counselors and the staff that provides that support in the classroom. So we're talking about two very different things. We're not in the business of mental health, psychiatric services, et cetera.
Well, and I think that's, Mr. Enos, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just, I know Ms. Marinelli, this is her base of the career, and Ms. Rose also, because when I look at this, about us in Sarasota County, ultimately being able to hire and retain the very best of the very best, and that these bonuses, as it says in there, because I know that we need nurses, I know we need counselors. I mean, you look at our priorities that we have. I mean, if this can help offset the cost as we look as being fiscally responsible, and this will be some additional money to the district to help offset the cost, I don't look at this as being, and I appreciate, that you brought that forward, because I think there needs to be clarity on that 100%. But I look at this as being, this is additional money that the state would allocate us for these positions, for bonuses, for retention, to be able to move forward. And if we can get some additional money to get the very best people, that's why, again, I think legislatively, I think that it's more than appropriate on there, because it doesn't appear to me that it's looking to fund programs. It's looking to help to get people. And people, ultimately, is the most important thing that we will ever have at this school district.
Yep. Mr. Edwards.
I think it's rare that when we're all having this exact same conversation around a topic as sensitive as mental health. And I agree with what Ms. Rose, my observation of how mental health was provided was through the system that you provided. That's how I observed it when I got here as a school board member. But I think what has complicated is by the time it gets to the school psychologist that there's an enormous backlog and a problem of finding mental health support when it's been appropriately identified. And how do we deliver that as a school district through the psychologist and or social workers? And I believe that's what has been the stress of student services, trying to figure out how do we follow the original DOE guidance and the fact that the backlog is enormous and very real. There is a mental health issue, not just here in Sarasota, but around the state and if not the country. But it's also not the first time that I've found ourselves in conflict of where the legislature passes and DOE has yet to catch up. It happens in the approval of charter schools, for example. We're not supposed to be approving charter schools, and yet the legislature hasn't come up with their board of who they're supposed. So we found ourselves approving a school that we may or may not want to approve because we were afraid of legal liability. So I'm in agreement that it's worded in such a way that stresses guidance more than not to eliminate funding, as Mr. Eno said, but that we're looking for guidance and clarification.
Well, and I think, thank you for that, because I think that's, the biggest part is this constant, are concerns about things bleeding into programmatic academic programs that are embedding certain things as we go into we're not even focused on tier 2, tier 3, we're talking about all tier, and it's going into all the instruction. And so one is making this worded in a format that's very clear to Mr. Enos's point of, it's about human capital, really to support particularly the risk assessments. But in addition to that, I find that it would be a good opportunity for us to highlight the challenges, because we do have staff that's under attack. I share the concerns that our families have as far as where's that line, but it's so mired that we do need some clarity. And I think that needs to start, I believe very strongly that it has to start at the legislative level, because that's the language that's bleeding into DOE and really leaving us at the point of, well, we have to do this, but, and that kind of puts people in a tough spot. So my hope is to take and I do believe, and I will continue to share my opinion of this at the state level too, but it would be wonderful if it's something we can agree on as a board. But if it's something we don't, I respectfully understand that. But I just wanted to raise that as I see it as an opportunity to clear up some of the issues that we have. I saw all these fingers, so yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Marinelli. I would like to see the mental health language taken out of our request, and I know that when I've had these conversations with executive staff, that's a line item in the state budget, but considering that Mrs. Ziegler, you've been in conversation and that we do have the opportunity to talk with DOE, I think that we lead the way. That we're, specifically what we're requesting, because, how many people listen to this workshop to know our intent? That's slim. And I think our intent needs to be clear that we want human capital, that traditionally the guidance counselor piece and specific with the roles that they have played, and to take out the divisiveness, the mental health piece, the SEL piece, the CASEL piece. We need to come together, and I'm sure that the Department of Education and legislators would be very happy seeing us focus in on core content and specific funding for specific support staff.
Yeah. Do you want to try? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the conversation. I just want to share with the group a couple of things in consideration as we look at amending this language. So we are allocated through a mental health assistance allocation, very specific categorical from the state. That is what this language is, our line item is saying we want to increase. We have full control of that plan. So we develop the budget. The board approves the plan, which we did probably a couple of meetings ago. So in terms of what we do in Sarasota County with these funds, as long as we meet the assurances of the grant that the state lays out for us for that, we dictate how we fund that $2.5 million that we get. I think ultimately, if we keep the language of 20 million, what we're saying here is that should have an impact on the $2.5 million that we receive, whether that be 3.5 million or however that shakes out. We understand we are dealing with a crisis with mental health in our district and in our nation. We understand that there are community providers that we partner with where the majority of these funds go to Ms. Marinelli's point that we're not in the business necessarily of dealing with the mental health issues. We identify them and we try to connect them with the appropriate resources. Curriculum is not identified in our current allocation, to your point, so we have full control of how we allocate this. I would make a suggestion that if we want to eliminate that language, maybe we suggest that that allocation itself is collapsed like they did last year with the instructional materials allocation, the reading categorical, that this category will be collapsed into the base allocation as well and allow us as a school district to figure out how we want to budget those dollars. But to lose that potential funding could be detrimental to us as well. So we want to be careful in how we move forward.
And that's the word, the semantics of it's kind of frustrating where we're trying to, and that's why I want to raise a red flag because it does matriculate into a lot of different other language. And that's really where the danger and the muck in the mire is. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. We were going along so well. A couple things. The first, I would want to address that I am not in favor of getting rid of mental health as a categorical or the language. I am not, because of the crisis and because I think it's important to let the community know that although we're not in the business of providing mental health, we understand that it's a criteria of funding that supports our students and our families as needed. So I'm not in favor of that. And the second piece that I would say is the way that I read the language, it has nothing to do with curriculum. And I'd like and Mrs. Ziegler, with all due respect, when you say it's embedded in curriculum, I ask several times, where is it embedded? Can you show us where that happens? And then if that happens in Sarasota, I can't, I'm not responsible for governing the rest of the state and their curriculum, but if it happens here in Sarasota, when that happens, we address it immediately, and I think we've done that as a board when it's come up. So I hate us saying that it's embedded in it. That's not our business. We are about the standards. We are about academic achievement and all of those kinds of things. If the DOE needs to change their standard or change their curriculum or change the options, then we just follow that law.
So just for clarity, so when I say the social emotional or CASEL framework is even written into the new, what is it called? Resiliency, is that correct? So we do have instructional material or programs that include that framework.
So we follow the state board education rules and statutes related to resiliency education, which are very similar to the CASEL framework. When you talk about as a component of resiliency is self-awareness is one of the topics. That is a leg of the CASEL framework as well. So to say that it is one or the other is difficult to define. And I think we've done a good job of vetting our materials, and we'll continue to do so. In terms of identifying exactly where CASEL lies, right? Because it does bleed over into resiliency, which is required by the statutes to teach. And so we have to just be very careful and moderate what we're doing in terms of our instruction.
And before, I just want to clear, because I just wanted to highlight that, because I know it's not intended to be hyperbole by any means. I think I'm really trying to figure out a way, because it's just a constant, and I think there's I think there's words used, I think there's concerns, and I want to use this opportunity to clarify those, and if we need to do it through legislation, let's seize that opportunity, because I do believe that's going to be going forward. And the last part is, I think, because when you use even the resiliency and peace, those are important. Like when you hear them, those are very important things we want to teach our students. And so I can imagine members of the public and any member of the board or even staff saying, like, what's wrong with that? And it's the co-opting of certain things. And that's what's so frustrating, because we've seen that happen before. And that's what kind of rips the trust away. And so if there's a way that we can have more, and I know Mr. Connor's doing a great job as far as vetting things as they come forward with this at the forefront, because we know if we're able to be proactive and still provide the quality, tools and professional development to our staff and to our students, so that they are able to thrive without falling down this co-opted rabbit hole, is good for everybody. Go ahead.
Extraordinarily important piece. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I understood my colleague correctly in saying that he was not in favor of getting rid of the mental health piece, I want to make this crystal clear, we have never, ever been in the business of mental health. When we're asking for these funds, and if I understand Mr. Connor correctly, Superintendent Connor, these funds are put out to an agency in the community that offers that service, that works directly with permission of parents, that we have not been in the mental health business.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I just want, I'm sorry, I just need to be very clear that I am not saying to get rid of something, and I can't say to get rid of something that we've never provided, that those funds are for us to, for lack of a better term, farm those out. As Mrs. Marinelli has said, as a administrator of district guidance and counseling, we have not been in the business of providing mental health services. So therefore, I cannot, it is not correct for me to say I want to get rid of something that that we've never done. This has to be explained very clearly, so that the community doesn't misinterpret any board member's intent.
Yes, if you could.
Yeah, just to clarify, to reiterate Ms. Rose's point, we get around $2.5 million in mental health funds every year. About half of that is dedicated to the partnership with those external community partners. We are in the business of helping our teachers understand the signs of potential mental health disorders. We train them on that. The state requires us to train them on youth mental health first aid. When we identify, then we connect. We connect them to the appropriate resources. We may have a social worker that's involved in that, a mental health clinician that may be involved in that. We now have a family navigator position that helps families connect with their permission, with parent permission, to those community resources. So yes, to your point, we do not service mental health in terms of providing that service. We make those connections when we identify the potential that there needs to be. To outside agencies.
To outside agencies.
That is correct.
We do not provide mental health services with any district-employed staff.
With outside agencies with parental consent.
Thank you. That's a very important clarification.
If there's ever anything that could make me pull my hair out, this will.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to
No,
clean up.
no. And I feel very strongly about this. We're leaving out a key word, and that is school counselor. That is their title, what they are called from the Department of Ed. A school social worker, a school psychologist, a school nurse. And why do you think they have the adjective, school before it? Because that is what they do, is they provide the services in the school. But what has happened because of what's been going on in our country, mental health is the buzzword. And that has been brought into our world because we have these students. Everything you've talked about, we've had a school navigator many, many years ago. Wasn't called that. That helped the student services staff link parents to outside resources. In budget cuts, that hit the wayside. We have been training staff. I worked in this district from the school level to when I retired, 35 years. We have provided training. I've been a recipient of that training on the whole state of affairs on children and what they were going through, starting with the big one when we had the crack babies coming in, and that's how they were told. Whether that's socially appropriate right now, probably not. But we were trained by nurses and doctors from Sarasota Memorial on what to expect when these children hit. We had never been faced with any of that. So training has been going on, but because of everything happening, it has fallen in our lap. So I'm going to state it again. We need to use the word school, counselor, social worker, psychologist, because that puts it in perspective of what they're to do. But I want the public to know that, and parents, very much aware. When you talk about, when I was at Southside as a school counselor, you talk about self-awareness. You're talking about how kids interact on the playground or how you act in their own personal space. You work in partnership with a parent on that. So this is not new, but how it's been forced, and I'll say it again, the counseling career has been hijacked by the terms SEL and CASEL. We never had it before. They've woven themselves in. And we need to weave it out so we can do what we need to do for kids.
And that's kind of where I'm recommending as we continue. We add school, to your point, I didn't have that in my notes, but school counselor, we have school social worker in item number 3 anyway, and then just add the school nurse, if that's accurate.
School psychologist.
The school social worker, and then we need school psychologist, so that to emphasize that. And then, again, because I was going to suggest to pull I know we were looking at timing, but this was the first one, but the 17th. But if we were to add the CASEL component to it, because it has caused a lot of questions, Mrs. Marinelli, you just highlighted it very, very well, so that it allows people, because my understanding and the due diligence that CASEL has substantial market share. However, in conversations, there are a handful of districts, to my understanding, that are also going to be requesting some support from the legislature on allowing that separation, so that we're not constantly in this battle with our members of staff, or our members of staff being kind of at the firing line, and then with the community, because I think there's a lot of, I think that's just the cleanest way to do it, and I don't understand there's a legislative aspect for it. I think keeping it simple, and I take any recommendations to how you would frame it, but then also to see if this is something that, I think it would help us a lot. I do. I think that it would go back to the way that you were explaining, and I think that's where all of us want to see that. Go ahead, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. I'm going to, because I'm not adversarial here.
Yeah.
I think we're basically saying the same things, and I need to express that because I feel sometimes you think it's adversarial and we're saying the same thing. I agree that, and I don't care if it's not called mental health, but I don't want the categorical to go.
Our teams go through and rectify that, at least at a local level. It sounds like your direction is maybe on this platform to create some language that goes on beyond just Sarasota, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I
just the
think
state
it's
of
more or
Florida.
less to clean up there where there's differences in that language. I think that's where it gets getting confusing, and that opens the opportunity for us to bring in something that I think is not, that we don't want and is not good for, I don't think that it's good for students. And I think that we're also finding our way with members of the community and staff concerned about it. So with that, I think also it affords us clarity at the state level when you think of that volume. And again, my understanding is there will be more, I think there's going to be a lot more either districts and other states that are going to be looking at this. And the reason I think this is important is if there are, as we look at new programs, I know that this is top of mind because of our conversations, but making sure that we do, to your point, at the local level, continue to remove that or build as we need to locally. However, and we have to have like an off-ramp of figuring out if there are any things that were currently in place, being mindful of that, and that would be included in the legislation. I just think that we highlight the clarity between that language and Castle is a problem, yes.
I concur, thank you, Madam Chair, I concur that I would like to include it in the legislative request and to emphasize and overemphasize and reinforce that we do want funding. We're codependent, obviously, on the funding of the state. The legislative and Department of Education requirements, and they've put us in a spot that does cause divisiveness, and we don't need it. We need to continue providing quality services. We need to make sure that we are providing those services in the form that our whole community, which can be done, actually, can be done quite well, believes in, and that we're meeting the needs of our students instructionally, and that we are working with community organizations for anything defined under mental health. So I would like to lead the way in Sarasota, and not necessarily have a legislative piece that mirrors other districts, but have one that mirrors districts, Sarasota leading the way with others, that we hold the DOE in our request accountable to eliminating the distractions of Castle.
Yeah. No, and I think if Mr. Parento, Mr. Connor, myself, taking guidance. I don't have the perfect format here, but I think that would go a long way in helping us restore some peace.
And reinforcing that is not eliminating any funds or reducing the amount of funds, but that we are using those funds how we have traditionally used them, and then contracting out the mental health piece that has never occurred and does not occur in providing those services in our district.
Did you have a? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. We get ever so close, and then it goes off the rail from this individual board member seat. I guess the piece that where you lose me is when we go along and we're asking for guidance and specifically around social emotional resiliency. And then at the last little, Mrs. Ziegler says, but I'd like to include CASEL in there. And that's where you lose me. So I guess for my purposes, because I am not on the page that our community is 100% part of the movement that is against social emotional learning. I think our community is divided in that place. And so where our community does come together is when our answer is back to the community, we follow the standards and we follow the guidelines, and we're not invested in one side of the movement or the other. We're following what the DOE, which is why I keep saying I can appreciate the guidance, I can appreciate the clarity for these particular issues, and we're not asking for CASEL to be removed. We're asking for the Department of Education to examine their position on CASEL, not us. And that's where and so I think the one other place.
I think that's a reasonable, and that's, I hear you, because I said, and that's why I was coming.
That's why I'm saying we get that, you go
well,
right, because I know you personally want it gone.
But when you said that language, I think that's that's not a bad position to be, so that we all can agree on it, that I'm recognizing I'm probably on the farther end of that. I think the reevaluation of it at the state level, I think that's a very reasonable thing to put in there. I think there are other, again, I think I want it to be on there if we can all agree on it. And so I would think that's a good conversation starter. Certainly.
Would you define for the public what CASEL is to you, what that means?
Well, it's a organization and a company, but also the framework is part of it. And so the social and emotional learning and how it's embedded into all of your instructional aspects. It's like, there's literally, if you go and research it, they want social emotional learning embedded in every single academic program we do, and that's where the consternation is. And so I think that's where there are questions about the data and to support the value of it. I think that data's coming back, that, whether it's a correlation or not is concerning. And I think that that's where we have an opportunity to say, hey, especially with the institutional knowledge of members on this board have raised, and I can appreciate the frustration that we're all finding, because I hear us during the meetings. I think we all want a lot of the same things. This is just an area of absolute disconnect.
That's why I'm saying that the community, I don't think, is 100% on your page. And partially because their perception of social emotional learning talks about respect, kindness, empathy, compassion, all values that I think we all share. Everybody wants that for our students. And when it gets lumped into, we want to make that go away, and we don't want it here, then you start to get community members who are not part of that movement saying, what about absentee parents? What about where they're not part, they don't get that kind of training. And so I don't want to have to, I want to be able to answer that question by saying, the state makes that determination for us, and that's how they make their determinations. And also, what I'm also concerned about that, and that's why I think it's an important state issue, is there's so much good curriculum that may have some of those components in it. I mean, the best curriculum, and then when you throw that out, are we getting second best curriculum? Are we getting third best curriculum? And so that's why I don't want to be in that business, because standards and academic achievement and student outcomes is highly important to this school board member. And so I want to make sure they have the best curriculum possible. And if that's the needle that is causing consternation, give it back to DOE and let them figure out how to keep the best curriculum possible for our students while addressing this movement.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really have to reiterate this again. This isn't about picking anyone's movement or not picking sides in the community. I'm extraordinarily confident that everyone in Sarasota County wants students to know respect and those kinds of principles. There is zero doubt in that. I think when we get to embedding into curriculum ideological priorities and the like, then we start to separate. And as a school system and as a public school system, we don't need priorities. Hence, Wilma Hamilton, every student, every day, and we focus on academics. So to lend any hint that every board member sitting in this workshop doesn't want principles of successful behavior is not something I will ever agree to. What I will agree to is advocating to the state to help us be focused, provide the highest quality, the most successful curriculum that all of our community buys into. And I know that that is very possible. So I'm not interested in talking about whose side anyone's on.
Well, I think, but raising the conversation, and I think we're all there where, I mean, even as your point of saying the evaluation of and looking at how that works. I think raising the point of putting it on here is raising the concern and that we need clarity. There is areas where that is not clear, and there are the evaluation of social emotional learning and CASEL into our programmatic recommendations and even stuff the Department of Education currently vets and approves.
So I hear two board members that are in favor of adding a particular statement in our legislative platform that essentially says that we are requesting the DOE to evaluate or provide guidance or clarity around CASEL and the framework within instructional materials.
Yes, that's one.
Okay. Do I have, I just would like, okay, 3. I just would like to have consensus on before. Now, the next step would be we could continue to, we could bring this tonight, we could work on language, or we can move this platform to the 17th, which.
If we move it to, to be fair, because it's an ad, and so I would say if you can draft the language that follows what was discussed here, and making it clear, yes, and then adding the other provisions, I would say, but we would pull it off and bring it to the 17th and then move along with our committee meetings. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be remiss by not saying that our current Student Services Department and counselors have already been evaluating the materials that are being said to try to weed out anything.
Right.
Does that mean that it's 100% perfect? Probably not. But if it is brought to anybody's attention, which I think it should go to the superintendent, because if somebody in the community lets me know, I send it right to you. I'm not getting into that.
Right.
I send it right to you. But I want the public to know that the counselors have been working with that with the Student Services Department here to try to get out all of that, because I can guarantee you that all they want to do is give the best to students in the learning environment.
Good.
Thank you, Ms. Marinelli. I think you're spot on in what you're saying. Our team is doing a fabulous job at vetting this material. I would say for reassurance for our community and for the board, recently, I think over the last 2 state adoptions, you've had state reviewers that are looking specifically and have rejected publishers based on controversial topics, which include SEL. So I think the state has a magnifying glass on this particular issue over the last couple of adoptions, and will continue, I would assume, into the future. That we are committed to making sure that when we look at core adoptions, that we are using materials off that state vetted list. So it goes through that level of review. Then it comes to our team for an additional layer of review. Doesn't mean things don't slip through. I mean, we're infallible, right? So the thing is we can correct those issues. And remember, instructional materials doesn't mean that we don't teach from page 1 to page 500. We use the materials and we build our curriculum internally within our district with experts who are sensitive, obviously, to the subjects that are buzzing in our community. And so our team has done a good job of that. I'm not going to sit here and say we're perfect at it. And things are going to come up, and we address them just like we have this year. If there's resources that are not in compliance with statute or with our state board rules, we will pause that, we will review it, we will revise it, or we will eliminate it.
Gotcha. Good. Mr. Edwards?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I think it's a mistake to think that, because I didn't really land on it until it was framed as a movement. And I think it is a mistake to say that the whole community is on the page of removing Castle. I think that's a mistake to make that assumption. And what I appreciate in our dialogue today was trying to find a way that we weren't calling it Castle, we weren't, and I think you all heard my concern about, is your concerns embedded in the very best instructional materials? And does instructional materials get sacrificed? And so I'm not advocating that there are sides in the community. I'm trying to find ways that we're not, and I think the push to Castle in its actual name is a word that does mean divisiveness in our community, and I'm trying to get the language, whether, I know Mrs. Rose didn't like mental health, so then call it something else. I don't care as long as the...
Please do not quote me. I never said that. Please.
You did.
This is inappropriate.
You're doing so well. Oh, no.
You did say that. And honestly, I would say that when your last comment was specifically directed at me, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to stay away from divisive conversations between school board members. I'm trying to get back to how do we get to the middle of the road to address all of our concerns for the legislative agenda. That doesn't make me a bad guy or a good guy. It just means I'm trying to do what you're trying to do. So I don't appreciate the context of a conversation coming at me headstrong. I can appreciate that we disagree. I can appreciate we're not on the same page, but I tend not to do that to others.
Disagree completely with that statement.
So the statements where we were evaluating the impact of social emotional learning, and Castle was in there to evaluate. I just want to be clear to fair. So that's because that's what I took away as to the statement. It's not necessarily citing one or the other, but
I can live with that language. I didn't appreciate the chit-chat that I was trying to divide the community into sides.
Okay.
Because that wasn't my intention.
Okay. So moving into time frame, do you believe that that's substantive enough, and I look over even at council, that should go on the 17th, or Mr. Duggan? Or is that something that goes on today and we can just could we amend can you come up with language that's appropriate for that? No.
I'd like to see the language.
Oh, okay, so then we move it to...
The 17th. That's my opinion. I know there were others.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. If I put myself back as the supervisors of student services, I can tell you in my training, I'd be telling everybody to stay away from Castle and do what we do for kids.
Yeah.
So it is a divisive word, and I think we need to do whatever, direct it to DOE, direct it to the legislature to have them give us the guidance. My talking with the executive director of student services, if I understood it correct, they're not really, DOE is not looking forward to giving us real direction on what kind of materials to use in the counseling realm. And I just said, well, I'd be pushing it because it's just setting everybody up for it. So however you draw it up,
Evaluating it, but I think that, yeah.
Put it in there to make sure that we stay compliant, because I want our kids to get the best. I want the divisiveness to stop, but I want our staff to know exactly, because you can't, this is like the year 2 that they're having to change everything because we're not getting the guidance from the Department of Ed that we need.
That's why I think this will help a lot. And there, again, with numbers and people and others saying that's not a movement side. This is a very divisive, problematic distraction, and a lot of us are actually.
Well said.
We all want the best outcomes, but this is getting very complicated, and we have to. There is a big elephant in the room, and it's but for getting it on the platform, I think we found a common ground. Now we just need to figure out if it's on the 17th or the 3rd. So,
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'll make a recommendation that what we can do is Mr. Parento can work on that language. We can get that out to you prior to our meeting today. If I feel that all 5 are comfortable with moving forward, we can keep it on tonight's agenda, or we could withdraw it if I don't feel that we are in a space for that.
I'm comfortable with it being on if the language is acceptable. If you get that in time.
I am, it's a problem for me only because we have a tendency of doing that, and I'd like to make it more procedural that what we discuss in a workshop gives us time to absorb and think about, and then I've had situations in the past. I just feel that rushing it through is the wrong way to go. That's this individual board member, and once we do it for one thing, we can allow ourselves to do it for others, and I think that's the problem.
I think for a point of order, I'm okay with that. Any other
You
recommendations?
have it. Okay.
So we'll bring it back for the 17th, if that's okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've rolled right into.
You had it easy.
So I think we had some technical difficulties. Are we good to go? Okay, good. All right.
The area that was missed, Ms. Connor, we will, whatever was missed, we'll put up, because we're still recording it. This is the live stream.
Okay.
Had a network malfunction somewhere in the
Okay, thank you.
We need a facility.
All right. So what's
Do we need to recess for a minute, or we want to move into our redistricting?
you guys need a break, or are we ready to go to redistricting? I'm ready to move forward. Everyone good? All thumbs up? No thumbs? Okay, we're going to move forward. Hello there, Mr. Duggan.
Good morning.
If you want to start us off, are we waiting for them to join us? Kurt's on. Kurt, are you there?
I am, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I am going to I'm going to tee this over to Mr. Duggan, our general counsel, and you have the floor.
Sure. So as you know, we recently had one-on-one calls with the consultant, Mr. Spitzer. In the aftermath of receiving input from each of you individually, he has provided 2 alternative maps you'll see behind me. I don't know if the public can see, but behind me they are blown up on the poster boards. And he is prepared to address any questions or concerns. I believe he has a short presentation to make in the form of a PowerPoint. So with your permission, I will turn things over to Mr. Spitzer to address you, and then he'll be available for questions thereafter.
Thank you. Mr. Spitzer, thanks for joining us today, and you are recognized and have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I trust you can see my PowerPoint on your screens now. Is that correct?
We can see your face. So
But not the PowerPoint.
not yet. Stand by 1 second.
Are you currently working with 2 screens?
Mr. Spitzer, are you currently working with 1 or 2 screens?
2. How's that?
Okay, no, so yeah, you have to share your second screen. So when you hit share, it'll be the red button or green should go to that second screen. And then it should switch it.
How's that?
There we
There you
go.
go.
And then if you do play presenters, we'll see the whole, there we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jamal.
We should just declare success right now. Right?
Okay.
All right. Well, so Thank you again. I enjoyed talking with you all last week. And what I'm going to do is go through some of the criteria concerning the redistricting process. And then we'll get into our recommendations to you. And then I'll jump over to the software and answer questions that you might have concerning the alternative maps and what some of the options are. But I'm going to be pretty brief with this PowerPoint. Redistricting is the process whereby we equalize differences that might exist in the population of different districts. It's not reapportionment. Reapportionment is when the state legislature or when Congress reallocates the number of members of the House of Representatives that are allocated to each state after each decennial census. And I think Florida gained maybe 2 seats this last time. We do this, though, to keep the district populations as nearly equal as is practicable or as is possible. It furthers the principle of one person, one vote, equal protection clause of the Constitution, and the right to vote in the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. As you know, there are a couple of general guidelines. The first one, though, is that they should be as nearly equal in population as is possible. And then there's other criteria. We try to not dilute minority voting strength. We follow census blocks. We follow criteria that make sense and are easy to understand for the voters of Sarasota County. We'll go through these quickly, these criteria. You can examine the need to adjust at any time, but typically this is done after each decennial census is released. You may adjust the boundaries whenever you want, although there's a new law that passed this past session of the legislature that said that any changes that are made to a district boundary must be done at least 270 days prior to the next general election for the jurisdiction. So there's direction in Florida statutes concerning the population of each districts. You're directed to have districts that are nearly equal in population as is possible or practicable. And we try to get these deviations from the mean as close to zero as we can, but it's hard to do, especially with other criteria such as compact shapes and things like that. It's population, it's not registered voters, it's the total number of people that live in the county as determined by the Bureau of the Census. If there are 2 districts that have deviations from the mean that total a spread of more than 10 points, that may raise a red flag. And in this example, this is, I think, Jefferson County. The largest district there was about 5.5% over. The smallest was 7.4% under. So that's a deviation or a spread of around 12 or 13 points. And so they redistricted their jurisdiction. There can be exceptions to the 10-point rule if you are able to create a minority influence or majority district. This was done in Suwannee County just recently. They went to about 10.3, a spread of 10.3 points, but that was to try to keep the one minority influence district in the county as strong has a high of a population of African American citizens as was possible, or to underpopulate a high growth area of the county. We try to not dilute minority voting strength either through what's called packing or cracking. Both of those tend to dilute the voting strength of minority residents of the community. We use census blocks. It's readily available. It's the smallest unit of where data is available. It's presumed to be correct. We look at total population of the jurisdiction and the districts for equal protection purposes, if there is an opportunity to create a minority influence district or a majority district, we look at voting age population, but it's population, it's not registered voters. If we were out maybe 6 years from now and you wanted to redistrict, you might consider supplementing or altering the 2020 data with other sources of demographic information, but you need to, that's very time consuming. There has to be valid reasons for doing so, and you have to document how you did that, your methodology, what that was. A couple of other common sense criteria. We follow significant natural or man-made boundaries, water bodies, significant roadways. They're easier to understand. They're usually coterminous with census blocks, less disruptive to voter precincts. Sometimes we follow existing district boundaries too. That's easier to understand for the voters, and it recognizes the will of the voters who elected the incumbent person. Districts have to be contiguous, although you may cross a water body to maintain contiguity. You try to keep cities and neighborhoods together, try to not split them. You obviously do not draw incumbents out of their own district, and we avoid districts that have the so-called bizarre shape, or the gerrymandering shape. This is the source of this term gerrymandering. Was some districts drawn by Governor Jerry in Massachusetts many years ago, and someone said, well, this looks like a salamander, and they said, no, it's a gerrymander. So that's how that term came about. But here's a more modern day version of that. In North Carolina 30 years ago, this was thrown out by the Supreme Court. Just too much of a bizarre shape there. So these are the criteria, all in general. It's impossible to follow all of those criteria to 100% of each criteria. And so what we do is we do our best, and we balance the criteria in concert with each other, with population being the dominant criterion. So I'm going to do two quick little case studies, and then we'll get to the options in Sarasota. We redistricted the city of Quincy a few years ago. Quincy had not redistricted itself in 45 years, and the spread between the smallest and largest district was not 5 or 10 points, it was 110 points. And so they needed to make some very significant changes to come into compliance. Here is the existing district's 110-point spread. This was the plan that was adopted. Quincy has a population of about 75%, maybe more, of African American folks. And so we brought this spread down to around 5 or 6 points. There were created 4 minority majority districts, and including 1 Hispanic influence district in Quincy. This was the existing district plan. This was the plan that was adopted. So there is, significant shifts in populations throughout the entire city. This is just one slide on the Leon County School Board. The Leon County Commission has 5 single-member districts and 2 at-large districts. The Leon County School Board had 5 single-member districts. When they were in the midst of redistricting maybe 20 years ago or so, the supervisor of elections was very interested in having the single-member districts have boundaries that are coterminous with each other. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. It's easier to understand for the voters. It's less expensive for the supervisor to manage elections and things like that. But in the first table, Plan 5, you can see where well over a third on average, in each district on average, there was a third of new people into the district, and in 2 districts, over half of the people in the district would have never voted for the incumbent. Now, that plan had a very low spread of just 1.3 points, but it was a significant shift in the population of those districts. The plan that they ended up adopting had a spread of 8.5 points between the largest and smallest district, but none of the districts had a significant new introduction of population into the district, or folks that never had the opportunity to vote for one of the incumbents. So that what they went with was plan number 1, not plan number 5. So for Sarasota, there are basically 3 options. Your districts currently have a very low spread. You could leave the existing district boundaries unchanged. You could pattern the boundaries after those used by the Sarasota County Commission, and there's been some interest in seeing what that would do. Or you could adjust the existing district boundaries to underpopulate those that have areas that are projected to grow more rapidly. So this is a table of the existing district boundaries. You have a spread between the largest and the smallest of 2.81 point, which is very, very good. It's very close on average to the mean or average district size. You could, I think, in my opinion, you could leave that untouched, and I don't think you'd be at risk for any sort of a valid challenge to that plan. Or you could pattern your plan after the county commission's districts. Now we'll get into this in greater detail when we get into the software where I can show you how this works, but basically this is the county commission's districts, these black lines. The shaded areas are your current districts. The difference here between the county commission and what we have drafted for the school board, this black line, it would be the school board boundary. The red line here is where the county commission boundary is now. You have one of your incumbents that lives in this area right here, and so we bump this line up, and then we sort of equalize population here by this change. But other than that, these lines are identical to those of the county commission, and it would get you closer to coterminous boundaries. And then when redistricting came up again after the next decennial census, presumably there'd be a conversation with the county commission about making these boundaries coterminous. The other option, as I mentioned, was to take the current plan and underpopulate those areas where there is projected to be a higher growth rate. And this is from your capital improvements plan for, I think, 23-24, which shows where the higher growth rate areas are. You're projected to, Sarasota County is to be, you're going to have over 500,000 people within the county. At the time of the census back in 2020, there were about 434,000 people. So it's significant rates of growth. Alternative 1, which patterns as best we can after the county commission district boundaries, has a spread of 3.39 points. Alternative 2A, which tries to underpopulate the higher growth areas of the county, has a spread of 9 points. Let me just say that if a jurisdiction is going to grow by 70,000 people or so, you know, 10% here would be 8,600. And so, you know, if we wanted to, what we're working with here is, you know, underpopulating the three faster growing areas of the county, but you cannot have a spread of more than 8,600 people, right? That's tough to get to, you know, where some areas are going to be, that those 70,000 people are going to be moving to. That's tough to get that within this context here of under 10 points. Now, if we had more time to do this, we're now up against the gun of this new law that was passed this past session. But if you had more time, you could probably, you know, push this envelope a little bit beyond the 10-point threshold and, you know, maybe get to a spread of maybe 14 points or so. But there has to be a well-documented, rational public policy reason for doing this. That would be a reason to do that if there was time. Here, we just wanted to stay under the 10-point threshold. If it's something that you're interested in, we could possibly, you know, get the higher growth rate areas a little bit more underpopulated. So, Madam Chair, with that, I'll answer any questions, or I could jump over to the software now too, and still continue with the questions if you'd like.
Yeah, so I'll stop. Anyone have any questions? I see none.
Let me jump over.
Mr. Duggan, I'm sorry, Mr. Duggan.
Mr. Spitzer, just to clarify, is it your position based on your specialized expertise that both alternative 1A and 2A would pass legal compliance as they are under the 10-point threshold?
Yes, they would. I think so.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Spitzer, why would one want to move? I mean, I want to understand the point rating system. I think you and I went over this, but I'm really doing it for the public. The map that we currently have is rated at 2.81. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's
it's not rated. It has a spread of 2.81 points.
right. And when you and I met, I believe it was on was that the 20th?
I don't recall when,
but then I had asked you at that point your professional opinion of that's a pretty good number, right?
It's a very good number.
So my question to you then was, there isn't really a whole lot of rationale as to why we would want to make a move, particularly since it was less than 2 years. The district and all the precincts and everything had been done through the SOE, and that was a really, you know, a great number. And if I'm looking at your numbers of the proposed, I think the original one you told me was 4.6, I think. Somehow you got it down to 3.39. And then the 9 doesn't even sound like something we should consider from your professional recommendation. Would that be fair to say?
Not really. I think that population is the dominant criteria, but the threshold that even for plans that are under a 10-point spread, they can still be out of compliance for other reasons, right? I don't think yours are, or any of the two proposed ones are, but they might be. But I think that as long as you're under the 10-point spread, and even in some cases, if you're over the 10-point spread, there are other policy objectives that the legislative body, the school board, may want to consider. And one might be, let's try to have our district boundaries be coterminous with those of the county commission. maybe let's try to pursue that policy objective, and this would be a good start now. And maybe we can, be talking with the county commission and the supervisor of elections, and then the next time redistricting comes up, maybe we could do this jointly and try to get our boundaries together. And the other objective too is to try as best we can, and I would admit that it's a tough goal to pursue if the jurisdiction is going to grow by 70,000 people over 10 years. But the other objective would be to try to underpopulate some of the faster growing areas with the idea that once we get after the next decennial census, perhaps they will be less imbalanced than they would be had we not done this. But I think those are objectives. Population is not the only criteria, but it's a very important one, but it's not the only criteria.
So if I mean, I'm just going based upon our conversation. We did have a very similar conversation, but I think that population is the predominant, and that there can be other considerations. But that's why we wait to do it every 10 years, so that we're not projecting where 70,000 people might be. We're doing it on actual, and that's why we do it based on data, because data and population is the predominant reason why we would do that, correct?
Well, the census data is presumed to be correct. It's updated every 10 years. And so we are, and so other jurisdictions like the county is even more specifically directed to do this after each decennial census. Yes, you look at it then to make sure you're in compliance that with state criteria and the equal protection clause of the Constitution. That doesn't say that you could not underpopulate some of these districts now. And my concern when I was talking about this a few minutes ago is not that the data is wrong. It's just that you can't underpopulate this. Let's assume that the data is right, and these are the high growth areas of the county. And this is professionally done projections. I assume they're correct. You can't underpopulate those high growth districts by that amount of people, because you'd be way over the 10-point spread and perhaps even over a 15 or 16-point spread. There have been plans that have been upheld with spreads of slightly over 16 points, but there has to be a rational underlying public policy reason for doing that. So you could do that, but it's not going to be something that would, we're not going to underpopulate a district by, 20 points and then overpopulate another one by 10 points or something like that. That's just not on the table.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that either of your proposed plans would not pass muster. I think they would. I think as an expert in this kind of work, that you wouldn't propose something that wouldn't pass, to Mr. Duggan's point, legal scrutiny. But but your whole theory of and or possibility of underpopulating, if you will, is based on theory, is based upon some projections of where developments are going to be and how fast they get built and how fast people move in. It's all conjecture versus why, as I said before, we do it every 10 years, because we get it on data, actual data.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? And then, Mr. Spitzer, you said you were going to go on and show the modeling. Is that correct? Or no,
well,
did I misunderstand?
It might be helpful to show the shaded areas are the existing district boundaries. And then alternative one,
I'm going to have
layers.
I'm going to have you share your screen one more time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We don't mind seeing you. There we go.
Good. The shaded areas are the existing district boundaries. Alternative 1, these are mostly the boundaries of the county commission districts with this difference here. The county commission district boundary here would go along this line here, follow the red line, and then continue up this way. We bumped that line up here to, there's one of your colleagues that resides in this area here. We bumped this line up here to keep that person in District 5 and to equalize the population of what came out of District 3 into 5. We moved this area from 5 into 3. So that's alternative number 1. Then alternative 2A, is very similar to your current plans, but we move some areas out of 5. This area here, I believe this is Eastgate, the Eastgate neighborhood. This is a combination of following census blocks, trying to not split a neighborhood, and getting to the right numbers that we can. And then there are some other changes here. A couple of the members of the board had suggested that this entire community here be kept in one particular district. And so we moved that all into District 2. District 2 is one of the high growth areas. So we moved some of this part here from 2 into 4. And District 1 is a high growth area as well. We moved this area here out of District 1 into District 4. And so those are the changes that were made to get to this alternative 2A, which has a spread of just over 9 points.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Mr. Spitzer, just to add something for the purposes of the discussion, you may recall at the last board meeting there was a lot of commentary about not displacing the candidate who is filed to run in District 2. After that board meeting, that candidate reached out to me and was gracious enough to provide an address for use in this process. Did you incorporate that address in the map drawing in these alternative 1A and alternative 2A?
I did. And that person, I believe, lives right underneath the District 2 symbology here.
Okay, so just to clarify, and I think when Mr. Duggan mentioned, and this is just for anyone listening or for board members, but I'm sure you guys know this, but the rule is such that it can't displace any incumbent and or candidate. Is that correct?
The statute contemplates not redrawing any boundaries that would, with the intent to favor or disfavor an incumbent or candidate. So I think, and Mr. Spitzer chime in here, is that under the status quo maps or alternative 1A or 2A, that candidate would not be displaced from the district that she is currently filed in. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's right here is where that address is, just above the district symbology, that little blue dot.
Perfect.
And so that person and any of the incumbents would not be displaced from their current district.
Okay, that was just more for the record than anything. Thank you. Any more questions? Mr. Edwards?
Thank you. Mr. Spitzer, I asked you this question yesterday on full disclosure when I called you, and I appreciate that I heard something similar in your explanation of the maps today. I asked you specifically, does Siesta Key in any of your maps move specifically from District 4 into District 2?
Yes.
And I believe what you said today when you were connecting the dots, that a couple of other board members asked the same question when you were doing your fact finding, that they wanted that connected.
There was a suggestion that the Siesta Key and the beach community be kept in all in one area. And so this whole area here this is Plan 2. This is the county commission, similar county commission boundaries. This area would be moved into, this is Plan 2A, into District 2. In the county commission plan, the boundary line would be here. So part of the lower end of this area, if we're following the county commission lines and not trying to move an incumbent or anybody else out of a particular district, the line would be here rather than down here.
So if we're looking at the equal division of populations, only alternative 1 moves Siesta Key from its entirety into District 2, and that rating is, I think, 3.3, and which would be better than alternative 2A, which is 9 and change.
Well, 2A moves all of Siesta Key into District 2.
Oh, so they both do. They both do.
Well, the county commission lines here, this would be the new District 1 here, right? And so it would move part of the lower end of the key into District 2, but not all.
I have a question on just understanding how this all works. As far as the numbers, I know I think we talked about this. As far as the numbers, the county commission doesn't follow, like the numbers geographically don't line up with can you speak to that? So the numbers geographically on the county are not necessarily the same numbers if you're talking about geographic and not displacing. So if and my understanding is that we're looking at the lines, so they don't have to be numerically the same way. But I need clarity on that.
That's correct. And when you look at the actual numbers that the county commission has and the school board has, the numbers are different, and that sounds easy enough to just switch the numbers around, but it's more complicated than that. So what we're talking about here is the boundaries themselves. If you adopted the map that was similar to the Board of County Commissioners map, the boundaries themselves would be similar, but the numbers would still remain different. And where that comes up is that, as you know, the elections are staggered, so that not everyone's up for election every 4 years. And they do even numbered districts on 2 years and odd numbers the other 2 years. So believe it or not, switching the numbers is a lot more complicated than it would appear just to move the numbers around. The other way that comes into play is that you cannot redraw boundaries to displace any of you from your existing boundaries. So I don't know if that would be a complete prohibition to move the numbers around. I'd have to talk to the supervisor of elections, but it certainly is something that would need to carefully be done if you wanted to switch the numbers to allow to the Board of County Commissioners. What the map does that would align with the Board of County Commissioners is more just along the same boundaries, and that would bring consistency to the people in those districts, even though the technical numbers would be different between the BCC and the school board. Gotcha.
Thank you.
And what we did here was to where the particular incumbent currently resided, that's where we moved the district nomenclature, right? And so that's how we got to District 1 being here and District 4 being this area here and so forth, where it was where we had to make a change here between comparing the county commission districts to these proposed districts for the school board is we had to raise this line up right here. But other than this boundary between 3 and 5, the boundaries are identical.
Okay, any other questions? So what, okay, is there more presentation, or are we?
I don't have anything. I guess it would just be any discussion, if you choose to have any amongst yourself, and then just this maybe a discussion about what the next steps would be. How, I think the superintendent and myself would need direction on, how to agenda this in the future, if at all.
Okay, board members? Someone asked for this, so I'm glad we had the opportunity to hear from a professional that's independent, because that's not been the case prior to that, but leading up to that, I defer to my board members as to how you want to move forward. Any comments? Nothing, no, so.
If I may, I think that, so as you heard the redistricting consultant, Mr. Spitzer, say, we have a 270-day deadline working back from the general election, which is in November of ¡24. As you know, that's new language, so that is something that we would be guessing on how that would be interpreted. Even though the general election by definition is November. As you know, school board elections are held in August,
Primary.
and which is typically the primary election. I think that term has a meaning. It's defined in Chapter 97 of the Florida statutes. So I think the better argument is that you count back from November, not August, although that's untested with this new language. So to be safe, if you were to count back from August instead, which would make us safe under either count back, that takes us to the beginning of November, would be the deadline for you all to pass redistricting if you wanted to within the current law. So obviously we have a board meeting on October 17th, which would be a timely vote on it. I think you probably could extend it to October 31st and still be within the time frame. Either way, under the narrow or conservative interpretation of that 270-day countback. But time is somewhat of an issue here, so your next step should contemplate certainly doing it within the permissive time, and my recommendation would be to play it safe and to do it, in the more narrow countback. The other thing you'll need to do, as Mr. Spitzer discussed, is if in the event you opt to make any changes, which you don't have to do, but in the event you did, there's 3 parts of the relevant statute. The first one is that you can make any change that you deem necessary. So my suggestion and recommendation would be to articulate on the record at the time of a vote what the thought process is, right? So that, and I don't know that it's necessarily the intent of any individual board member, but the intent of you all as a group, at least the majority of you, right? You'll want to have the intent to not favor or disfavor a candidate or an incumbent. So I think that is part of the thought process when you're articulating the need or necessity to do it in a way that does not do that, which would be prohibited. And that would be my recommendation on how to proceed. If you did, would be ready to make a record for the public and, as part of the thought process.
Very good. You mentioned the October 31st. We don't have do we have a board meeting? No, I don't think so. Halloween. No, but I.
Do we have another one? I thought we had another one at the end of October.
17th.
So it's just the 17th. Okay, so I stand corrected on that. My apologies.
No, that's okay. No,
so you need to really, in order to do it timely, then my recommendation would be, if you're going to take action, to do it on the 17th.
Okay, and then the final one was that, and you are looking at the primary, because it's when general elections, the statute, that's usually November. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. My understanding is redistricting has to be done in an odd year anyway, so we're only tacking on.
Well, they actually changed, that's my point, is they changed the statutory language. It used to be, prior to July 1st, it used to be even year, odd year, and that's what the statute literally said. Now it says 270, you can do it any time as long as you're outside of 270 days prior to the general election. Now, the term general election is defined, and it essentially means the November election. But again, it's a little odd with the way that it is done with school board members whose election, at least in Sarasota, is in August. So to play it safe, we counted back both ways. And when you count back, even using the August date as the starting of the day where you start counting back the 270 days, October 17th would be still within the permissible time to do this under either scenario.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Since no board member stepped up in terms of next steps, I would make one. According to our suggested approach and work plan, we are at step 5, task 5. If requested to do so, consultant conducts presentation to the school board on the process, the criteria, and the practices, and the remaining plan for the project, redistricting, so forth and so on, by October 3rd, which is, in fact, today, my sister's birthday. And it also shows in the schedule that we would only be obligated, as per my read of the document, of 18,000 of the 39,000. So since no school board member or anybody stepped up to the plate, I would say that I saw that our 2.81 was the best map of all, and I think we table this issue and save the money.
Okay, any other comments?
If I might,
Yep. Mr. Spitzer.
I'm not quite sure if I agree with that reading of the language there.
My understanding of the contract, and certainly the intent, was to make this into multiple parts. So in the event that you all decided not to move forward, the district would not incur the entire cost. But my understanding of the reading is we are already, as of today, past point 1, and we have accomplished part 2. So of the 39,000, the board would be obligated for 36,000 at this point. Whether you move forward or not, if you did move forward, you would be obligated for the full 39,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Enos?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak on that. One of the things that I had in regards to the questions is I look at a lot of different things. And one of the things is I know when you start looking at single-member districts, you start looking at the state legislature and making the partisan elections, it comes up, you start looking at a lot of different things, is that I think that one of the things that we should be, and the one thing that I am in favor of, is that what is the general public and the voters in reference to how are they going to be able to identify in which district? So one of the things that I talked about when I had my meetings and spoke to Mr. Connor too, is that I look at is that if I was a voter, the way that the current map is, and I am the person that's in District 5 that has to have the little thing outside of the county, is that just in there is that I'm in Northport, and I know Mr. Edwards is also in Northport, and then no, not your residence, I'm talking about your district, is that when you look at the totality of that, is that I am in favor of doing it towards the map of the county commission for a variety of different reasons, but one of them is just for basic voter consistency and knowing who it is, and that one board member deals with one county commissioner at a time instead of having to do multiple, in case that was ever the future of the legislature. Currently, as it is, since everybody is at large and you can vote in any district, everybody votes for everybody that's on there. I just look at it as saying is that it's pretty negligible between what it is. I think it's 2.81 to go to the county district, county commission map, which is 3.39. So you're looking at less than 0.5 in the totality of the switch, and that it also then gives the voting public an opportunity that they also would be able to, and that we would be consistent with what the county commission is in representation of the people in which we serve. So thus being in that manner, that's what I ultimately was my concerns, what I expressed there. And I think that this does exactly to that, is that it makes it consistent with the voters to know who their county commissioner is, to who their board member is, as well as it aligns us with the county as they move forward a population, which they're obligated to do, that we stay on top of that as it relates to the census, voting members, all the different things as it goes to the future. And I think that would fill the statutory need in order to make the change for the consistency, again, for the voting public as it relates to, it kind of takes care of it that in the future also as the census comes through and the other voting public, as the numbers change, as it keeps us consistent with the county, because we know that the county is going to maintain that as well as we are. But I think it just leads to a little bit of consistency. That's just my opinion as I look at this, as I project it to the future, and that if you're representing your district, that you have one county commissioner to deal with instead of potentially where you would have two. And there's lots of different places where you're actually dealing with two people instead of just one. So if we really are looking for that representation, that would be my rationale for looking at it, to doing the the redistricting as it relates to the county commission, which when I did speak to Mr. Spitzer, he said there was a lot of other counties in the state of Florida that's also have done exactly the same thing for the same rationale. And so that's where I kind of stand with my personal feelings as we move forward, but I also know with the growth in population, but I just think that it just makes it cleaner to do it that way, and then at some point, it can be switched back to actually be exactly to there after my term is over.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? That's one, two, I have two. We need direction. I personally am somewhat indifferent. My biggest thing was making sure we're in compliance and making sure, really, that was ultimately is allowing the community an opportunity to see the process since we've never done it quite this way. So are there any other comments? Because right now, then I don't have any direction for the superintendent or the general counsel.
Well, and I've been asked to handle this process because it largely is legal, but I think the superintendent would need direction on whether to ultimately, he, as the builder of the agenda, the question becomes whether we add this for something for you to vote on October 17th or not, really is ultimately the question.
Okay. So right now, I have not, I mean, not everyone's weighed in, so I'm going to leave it. Is that it? There's nothing else? Okay, well, then, I mean, I'm sorry. Trying to listen to everybody here, but I don't see any other comments. So is that to assume that there's no action moving forward?
I'm fine with going forward with the being more in line with the county commissioners. I hesitate. I have been targeted on a local radio show by a colleague, as well as I have printouts from the Democratic Party coming, doing a call, actual printouts. So I hesitate to, put myself in that position. The first one is the Democratic Public Education Caucus sends an announcement to go to the Sarasota County School Board meeting and speak up loud with a sign-up link to the Sarasota Democratic Party. The Venice Area Democratic Club posts on social media to go to Sarasota County School Board meeting to support our candidates. And then there's actual pictures of the candidates. So this has become very politicized, which is why I hesitate I brought up the idea to look at the county commissioner lines. It was not done correctly in the past, and I did not make the motion to bring on the consultant, but I have been significantly targeted, and by printout of a local political party, it's to support their candidates. So I will say that I do support getting in line with the county commission.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Is there any other comments?
With hesitancy of the political intent coming from a group.
I had made when I had my conversations, that having the way the growth is going out east, and I did talk to a county commissioner to see how far Honore and, Lorraine Road was going to go, Lorraine Road, and it's going to go all the way to Knights Trail. So we know there's going to be tremendous growth in that area. So I was looking at, in District 4, how that would impact that growth. And also listening to many, many people in the community that the Keys, Siesta Key is its own entity. It is divided by a body of water when you connect it to St. Armand's and Lido. There is a distinct difference between those keys. So that was why, for me, was to have Siesta Key be its own, and Longboat and St. Armand's, but also looking at the growth that's going to go out east. And we have a brand new school, we have the hospital, we have the fire academies, there's many subdivisions that are, if you follow the county commission and what they have approved, there are things that are in the works, whether they're apartments or they're homes, single-family homes. So that was my rationale when I spoke to it. So, and aligning it to the county commission, I'm okay with that too. So.
Okay. I need.
So I was looking at personally, I was looking at 2A because I knew that would be adjusted over time, even though it's at 9. But I was looking at 2A. But I'm okay with the county commission because I also know that it's very confusing the way things are set up right now.
So just to clarify, is the direction to leave it on for the 17th with all of the alternatives available, or is something more narrow what a majority of you wish to do?
I personally feel that no matter what, it's on. That no matter what direction, there's going to be political blowback, which I think is really unfortunate because you hear from many people you want politics out, but any decision that myself or other board members make, it's always made political. So just need to know it's a point of fact that it's no matter what it is, and I think it's just unfortunate because I'm here to make best decisions for the community, but for our kids, and everything gets made political. So.
I don't disagree there, but Mr. Edwards, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I think it's unfair to take the position of being a victim in this process. From my perspective, I had to really work hard to have what I perceive to have been workshopped at the last school board meeting when this wasn't in the conversation, in the framework of what we're doing today. It was brought up as, I'd like to think about this, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting at a board meeting with a vote to hire a consultant. And there was no dialogue, there was no conversation. And the victimhood was, I didn't bring it up. The person who brought it up, that's not academic excellence, was all of the things that I kept saying. And when we look at the data, the map that we have, that's already been decided by the SOE, it's already done. So if we change it, they're going to undo it. And so lastly, I asked 3 times at the last meeting, why are we doing this? Why? And I never got an answer. And finally, I would say, it would make the most amount of sense that this would be done at the next census if it's the desire of the board to match them then. Because right now, we are not single-member districts. We are not partisan. And there's no need to make this change. And I still cannot, unless someone can tell me the why today, none of that rationale so far matters. The board's going to vote and do what the board wants to do, but there's always been, and I know Ms. Rose said something about a radio show. I would stand behind, there's plenty of hearsay out there about Mrs. Rose's actual residency. That's hearsay from my point of view. So I'm just pointing it out, which I did say on the radio show, that will be a question.
May I?
Yes, you may.
Since my name continually gets targeted by a colleague and by a partisan party politically, and I am in agreement. I'm not going to stand down because of the personal targets being called to action on me, that I do agree, and the consultant has put forth the legalities of going to the alignment with the commissioner's map. And because someone makes a statement, does not make it true.
I agree with that too. So,
Well, I'd like to agree that if we could keep it on the October 17th, and I would go ahead and I would say that during that time period, obviously, each board member could talk to their constituents. I still believe that 100% is that to make it easier for the voting public, no matter whatever it is that to be in alignment with the county commissioners. I think that is ultimately, in my estimation, is ultimately is the best practice, especially when it looks to the future. And so my recommendation would be is to leave it on there for Mr. Connor to keep it on the agenda for the October 17th and for everyone to go ahead and make their decision. I would also say that since there's 3 board members, it looks like that are in agreement with the county commission, is that would ultimately be the focus as we move forward. But again, I would be hesitant to say that I won't speak for anybody else other than me from doing my research and my justifications that I have in reference to being in compliance with state statute, that I would make the recommendation to go ahead to do that, because I think at this point it puts us there, because I know I just think that at the end of the day, we owe it to the public, because we're public servants, that we owe it to the public to make it the best for them and the easiest for them to be able to heard in reference to where they are and what they're doing in reference to what they would like to see being moved forward. So I would say that that would be my request for the recommendation. If we want to limit it to the one thing, I think it makes the most sense to do it in reference to the county commission. And I think that they ultimately are going to have to make adjustments, as Ms. Marinelli said, because there's going to be some adjustments that make, because if you look at the Fruitville corridor, you look at the corridor down by Knights Trail, but if you look at it generally in the entire county, and I hate to say overpopulation, but I think that at the end of the day, in the total county, there's going to be growth everywhere, and it'll ultimately be adjusted. But I think it leaves us in a better position that if I live in District 5, let's just mine as, that I know currently it's Commissioner Cutzinger, and it also would be school board member Tim Enos, and that would be easier for the public as they move forward. And that would be the reason why I think that it's needed to make it, because it is convoluted in that it crosses many different county commission lines. And I think this is easier for the public, which I think is statutorily is one of the reasons why you can make the change.
Okay.
And may I?
Yep.
For the record, my recall is very exact that reasons were stated from the get-go, and because someone says that those reasons weren't stated does not make it accurate. I encourage folks to go back and look at the tape, very similar to the previous, the separation with a former superintendent. It continues to be perpetuated that there weren't reasons. There were actually lists of data-based objective reasons, and to include systems and processes and procedures, in addition to a third of our students not being at grade level, nor any working plan to change that. So, staying focused on academic achievement and coming together as a board, I certainly hope that we can leave our political affiliations and calls to action to them and narratives and et cetera, professing one thing and the behaviors are another. I was targeted. Go back and listen to the last school board meeting, and it is a distraction and it's clutter, and it gets in the way, and I would hope we can stay focused and accurate. Thank you.
Mr. Duggan, do you have the direction that you need?
Well, what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have one board member who would like to remain with the status quo and not move forward. I think that's what Mr. Edwards is espousing. I have heard that Mr. Enos and Ms. Rose and Ms. Marinelli are comfortable with, moving towards the map that materially aligns with the Board of County Commissioners map. I have heard Ms. Ziegler say that she has relative ambivalence, and I have also heard Ms. Marinelli say that she would like to use the map that takes into consideration as an alternative that is still on the table, the east growth and the Siesta Key one, which is 2A. So,
and just for a reminder, the 2A had the 9-point-something spread.
That's correct. So I think we have clarity on moving it to the October 17th board meeting for consideration. I'm looking to you all to tell me what the scope of that looks like. Is that all three options, do nothing, 1A or 2A, or is that move forward to the 17th with just the option that materially aligns to the Board of County Commissioners map? That's the question, is that second question that I don't know that there's clarity on.
I'm going to ask for purposes of making the next decision clear for the community, clear for, I mean, I guess I'm indifferent, but when you do all three, I think it would be beneficial to narrow it down to, that would be my recommendation, but if we want to keep all three, we just need to give direction. So I know that you've said yours. I don't know if you want to keep 2A on there, and then we just, that's fine.
I'm like you, Mrs. Ziegler. I don't want to use the word ambivalent, but it's, if it's the county commission.
Well, I can tell you, if it were me, we were up there looking at those two, the 9 point something makes me that's a little bit high. I mean, that's going a very, very significant difference, so.
I'm fine with the county commission. I just wanted to bring what was shared with me.
Right.
Because of the fact that is my district currently, what constituents said to me about looking at the keys. So I would be remiss if I did not bring that up. So.
Mr. Connor, did you have your hand?
Yeah, so I think from what I'm hearing from the group is that moving forward for October 17th, bring forth alternative 1, map 1 is the consensus of the group, which aligns more to the county commissioners. That
sounds, yeah.
Alternative 1, yes.
Yes. So we will bring forth that one map for consideration on October 17th.
Which would essentially make the choices remain with status quo or adopt map 1A.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have to say that being, going through this process, to me was transparent, because looking back, if you look at the past, whether it's the transcript or the last board majority, it was not done like this. And if nothing else, this is transparent. Whether you like the results or not, it's how the vote will go. But this was transparent. It was discussed. We had the consultant to be the public to hear. But when you listen to the last one, it basically was, here's the map at the workshop. You could look at it and bam, the vote the same day. So I think we got to just stop this of like, this board does that and that board did this, because it happens either way. So we just need to stop it, because it causes division. And this, to me, was transparent. How the chips fall on the 17th, they'll fall.
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Spitzer is still with us, but I did appreciate his expertise, and I found it very interesting when our 101s that has not been afforded previously. So, and now these are available, and that data I think is available for the community to access. Is that correct? Okay. So are we concluded? Do you need any further information?
I don't need anything. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. I'm sorry to have too many pieces of paper, but we're moving on to.
So executive session.
I'm sorry, what? Are there any member comments? Mr. Edwards?
I want to first say that there needs to be a tighter procedure, however that work shakes out, that when something is brought up in member comments, that I personally believe it becomes an agenda item to be discussed, and then consensus happens. Because what I got from Mr. Duggan was, I got no pushback, so we moved forward. I'd rather see it more formal from one specific board member. And that's not the first time that has happened. Secondly, I have brought this up before, and I will start by saying that it directly affects academic achievement. So let me start there. And the topic is affordable housing. It is my contention that if we had a cost-effective, affordable housing option for our teachers and our staff, that we would be able to hire the best instructional staff in our area, if not the state. And the same with our support staff, whether it be bus drivers, food service, child psychologists, all social workers, you name it. And there is an option that I have asked the board for consideration for that does not cost any money to the school district, and it does not put us in the housing business. It's completely not our responsibility. So I'd like the opportunity to present that to the board in the same context of, I bring it up in member comments, it shows up on a workshop agenda, it gets a formal presentation, and we talk about it.
Thank you.
I have a second one.
Mr. Connor had brought, now forgive me if workforce housing is different than affordable housing. I could be.
It's called many different things.
So-
Attainable workforce.
That's why, I mean,
What else? I heard one recently too that.
that's why I didn't know, are they different things? Because we had a conversation about that. And so I don't know if you have, you did, right? There was, workforce housing was on one of those agenda discussions. So I'm not sure if that, like, I'll defer to you as far as, was that something, I thought you said there was a presentation from City of Sarasota?
So we do have, there's a couple of options. I've actually been approached by a few, either public agencies or private, in regards to this concept. So I'm not familiar with the one that Mr. Edwards is proposing, but that would be a third option. So I think there could be a relative discussion workshop around this, the idea of what that would look like and where we could potentially go. So I'll look towards the board on that direction.
May I? I think that it's my understanding and would like clarification on it as we proceed. I think that workforce housing, or whatever title we want to give it, is a worthy subject, and the county commissioners, the city commission, there's several different projects, I think, that are out in the open in discussion. I don't know that any of them are have been pursued. I think there's one on Fruitville that is complete. I know that we had our teachers through Human Resources had access to controlled rent at, I think it was called Lemon, was it Lemon?
Lofts on Lemon.
Lots on Lemon. I think that if we're going to go forward, that we go forward in a study of whether that happens with staff or in the form of a workshop. I'm not sure that what are all the things that are in place, because there's several different kinds of projects. What is the success of those? I was told in its hearsay at this point, I'm not sure if all of the lots on Lemon were able to be, if there were leases that were successful. I think there's so many pieces to this that we need to educate ourselves, or that if it's the desire of the board to learn or know more, as much as I hesitate to think out loud, that is the board want the staff to research all the different things that are going on, or do we want that in the form of a public workshop? There's just a lot going on with it, and I think that we have a role, but there's a lot of different options, and again, emphasizing the successful partnerships that we've had with our all the government agencies in Sarasota County. What behooves us to see what they're doing and versus do things in isolation.
Thank you. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to see our superintendent lead this. So I don't think it's an individual board member's operational place to bring forward. I think that would be something that Mr. Edwards would talk with you about, and then that becomes part of the whole different options that would be discussed. So I think for me, you lead that, you talk with the different municipalities, what's going out there, get the information from Mr. Edwards, include that, and then if you want to involve staff, and then bring it back to us in a workshop. So we can look at the big picture and know what is something that we have a role in. I don't think we are, it's the sole responsibility of the school district to be in the housing. But we have a role, but I honestly don't know what that role would be because this is new territory. So I would leave that for you to get back to us.
Mr. Enos?
Thank you.
And I would agree the same thing. I know also we have a fiduciary responsibility also in reference to this, as well as we're going to executive session. And, it's all of that comes into play, again, as recruitment and retention. I think that we do have a responsibility in reference to that, but it's also working in partnership with the rest of the community. It's just not ours. It's a law enforcement issue. It's a fireman issue. It's a lot of people's different issues as we move forward because we're all looking for the same quality workforce, and we're all looking at Sarasota where, with my children living here, it's significantly a struggle for them to be able to do what they need to do. And obviously, I'm all about, especially as we get into this with our teachers' pay, we've never, ever been behind any of the communities around here, and it's time for us, again, to take the lead as it relates to that, because our staff and our people here deserve that. So I think that, as in Mr. Edwards' point, I think it should be something that Mr. Connor brings back and that we can look at all the different things to see if lots on them, because I've heard that there's a lot of leases that are still available down there because the teachers don't qualify. Because it's too expensive if they make too much money to qualify. And I also know that the developer also has to make, and I'm somewhat familiar with the company with Mr. Edwards, as I've done some research on. But at the end of the day, I think it's something that, again, it should be that it's a community issue. We should get the information and bring it back at a workshop, all the things that are available. Here's some options, because also that also goes into land and other things, which comes back to the landings and it has a lot of moving parts. And I agree that it should be brought forward and have it as a workshop and have it be led by Mr. Connor in reference to what are the options where we are currently. So thank you.
No, I agree as far as if you feel that you have the capacity. I know we talked about this before. There was a lot happening with the school board, the superintendent, et cetera. And so being laser focused on academic achievement, I can appreciate you saying that this does play a role into it, because as far as impacting our staff. My request would be that it be evaluated as to what's going on out there, what different programs are. I've certainly, a number of government agencies have spoken about this. One of my contentions is that doesn't mean we have to live in a bubble, but is that we don't dip our toe into the real estate business. But that may not be at all what we're talking about, right? So, but that it be that the evaluation be done. What are all of the different scenarios? And my always question is where is it being done the best, and they have successful outcomes, and what role did the school district play where you can have evidence of such? But that would be my request if presenting on that. Any other comments? Okay, do you have questions on that?
No, thank you. I think I have clarity on that. I know this is a very important and urgent issue, but I would look to say probably as I get through the transition plan, we will begin to do our research. And I would probably look at the new year, maybe January, February-ish, that we would look to do a workshop on this. All right.
Thank you.
Is that up to you?
All right.
And
next week.
And just to be clear, and just for clarification, not to be clear, the scenario that I believe you're talking about is the Vermillion Consulting that I brought up, that went from this to board vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, that happened before.
Right, and then this one, and I just, for purposes of clarification, the reason that they didn't go into a formal workshop is where that was more, there was really, and whether right or wrong, my logic was that they were board decisions, not so much a staff discussion, and that's why when it was discussed here, and again, I don't necessarily particularly, not looking for a tit for tat, I was trying to merely explain that in my mind it was when, for example, if you just look at this is going to require superintendent to go back and look at staff, do evaluations, and then have a presentation. So that is the logic behind those two scenarios. So. Oh, you have a second comment? Yes. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Let me start by saying that I appreciate your clarification, and I have worked very, very hard to have a different culture on this board since Mr. Goner got here. I think we all said that. So that's why I brought up the affordable housing and connected it to academic achievement, and that's where, and just because we've never done it before doesn't mean it's not, and this is how we used to do it is not always the best answer. But it's, so I just want to clarify. And also, as this board member who brought the Trades Academy, who's working on trying to get that last building built in a community partnership, I will always be strategic, as we talked about in our workshop. I like coming up with ideas and suggestions, bringing them back to the board, bringing them back to the superintendent. So I'm very happy that we're going to actually have the affordable housing conversation. Here's my second concern that I'd like us to consider. When I got to the board, we had a council, his name was Art Hardy, and he functioned as and it's been clear to me that the board hires our attorney. But when I got here, I think we were 37,000 and change of students. It was high 30s. We're getting on the way to 50, and I'm not sure that having a single counsel for the school district and the board is in the best interest of the board and the school district, but most importantly, our finances. Mm-hmm. So I would like for the board to consider a study that Mr. Connor can put together about what an in-house counsel looks like, the roles and responsibilities, particularly now that we have Mr. Parento, how that all comes together. I think we've talked about the stresses that we're going to see with ESSER dollars going away, and how this mechanism might be utilized as a cost savings mechanism and a more efficient way to approach our legal requirements. So I'm bringing that up as my second member comment.
Very good. Thank you. I know that was addressed previously. I don't recall when. We did talk about it, I think, as a board. And then Mr. Connor, I know we've discussed it, try to figure out what that time is, trying to get past that 100-day, but doing a proper analysis, because there is when you say that size as a district, yes, we're kind of at that middle district tipping point. And I know your experience from the various districts you've been at. So I think, if I recall, that was something I think we all agreed on or would like to look at from a cost benefit analysis or however you do that. And then as far as time frame, but I do think it's something that would be worthy just to evaluate, probably looking into next year, but I would agree. I think it's something we have addressed before.
It's like with everything else we're going to look at with the budget. So
yeah.
So we need to do that at the appropriate time. So.
Just for clarity,
Yep.
when you say in-house counsel, is it related for the school board in-house counsel or for me, superintendent? Yes. Okay.
And there's a whole, and I'd be curious if who does that? Do we have to get a consultant to evaluate that? But because with, again, only having seen it in previous years with Mr. Hardy, who had been there, wonderful. We miss you, Mr. Hardy, if you're listening. I'm sure he's not listening. but that there are, from a governance structure, most would say it is ideal that the board has their own counsel and then administration has their own counsel. Then there's what does that look like? Paralegals. There's a whole litany there that I think is always discussed but never really evaluated. And so I think if we're going to go down that way, which I think is prudent, that we would do it with probably a firm that would provide an analysis.
So are we looking at only having a study of in-house counsel or a actually having a legal department that would serve the school board as well as the superintendent. What is the intent of going forward here, to be clear?
Well, the way and I don't want to speak, I'll let Mr. Edwards start. So what the intent?
I believe that the school board should always want to have their own counsel. And that would be my recommendation, is that we're not looking to have everything become in-house. So my further clarification to some of the things that be brought up is that certainly we're still in the 100 days. I'm not trying to say this is something that but I do think having it addressed early on next year is an important consideration from a budget standpoint. I think there are plenty of school districts out there that have counsel already to the school board, and then in-house that are school board employees, or school district employees, if you will. And I think some of the obvious things could be in and around real estate, HR, some of the things that we don't have to necessarily go to the higher bill rates for, that are standard operating procedures that could be handled. And then that fact-finding work could really come up with roles, responsibilities, job descriptions, and be very clear that the attorney for the school board does this and the in-house counsel does that.
Did that answer your question? Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a multitude of different models. That my curious is what doing historical and then looking at trends as we move forward based on student population, but also just general growth, and then there's just general economic trends that you start to see increased costs. So all of that taken into effect, and then compares the different models and see what makes sense.
I agree with that. If we're going to do a study, I would like, very similar to workforce housing, if we're going to do a study on legal, that it's thorough and has the complete impact on the district as we go forward.
Okay, my direction is to do the research.
They pay you the big bucks.
I will do that.
Or find a
Not
firm.
in the 100 days.
Yeah, no, outside the 100 days. No, I did, but I think if we're going to go through that, it should be evaluated in a way that makes sense. That'll be an ROI. Any other member comments? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned, and we will be meeting in 3:15 or here. 3:15 for executives. Here's the sheet I was looking for. We
could probably meet here. Do we need to move? You think?
Mrs. Tompkins, are we meeting here or 3:15?
Okay, 3:15.
Oh, so they can get ready. Okay. So we are meeting for executive session. We'll have a brief lunch, I guess, and then we reconvene at 3 o'clock for our board meeting.
Well, it's supposed to be at 12:30. I don't think it's going to last.
So we're doing executive session first. 3:15.